My son thought I did not see his hand hovering over my favorite mug. He thought the old man was too blind to notice the fine white powder dissolving into the chamomile tea. When he turned his back to fetch the honey, I did the only logical thing. I switched our cups. You will not believe what happened next, or the chilling secret I uncovered when he hit the floor. Before I tell you how a simple cup of tea exposed the darkest betrayal of my life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart people who mistook your kindness for weakness. My name is Mitchell. I am 70 years old, a retired African-American man living a quiet life in the suburbs of Atlanta. Or at least that is what my family thought. Cameron. My 35-year-old son walked back into the living room with a forced smile plastered across his face. He handed me the mug, his eyes briefly darting to the rim before meeting mine. "Drink up, Pops," he said, his voice dripping with a fake warmth that made my stomach churn. "It will help you sleep. You have been looking so tired lately." I smiled back, taking the mug with a deliberately shaky hand. "Thank you, son. You are always looking out for your old man." I brought the rim to my lips but did not swallow a drop, pretending the liquid was too hot. I set it down on the coaster next to his matching mug. Cameron sat in the armchair opposite me, picking up the cup I had quietly slid to his side of the table just moments before. He took a long, deep gulp of the spiked tea, completely unaware that he had just swallowed his own poison. I watched him over the rim of my glasses, maintaining the facade of a fragile, grateful father. For a few minutes, he kept up the small talk, asking about my joint pain and my latest doctor visits. I played along, offering vague answers, waiting for the inevitable. It did not take long. The powder he had used must have been incredibly potent. Mid-sentence, his speech began to slur. He blinked hard, shaking his head as if trying to clear a sudden fog. "Dad, I feel kind of dizzy." He mumbled the words heavy and uncoordinated on his tongue. He tried to stand up from the armchair, his hands gripping the armrests until his knuckles turned pale, but his legs simply gave way. He slumped back hard against the cushions, his eyes rolling back before fluttering shut. Within seconds, his breathing slowed to a deep, heavy rhythm. He was completely unconscious. I sat in silence for a long moment, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway echoing in the quiet living room. The man sitting across from me was my own flesh and blood, the boy I had raised after his mother passed away, the son I had worked tirelessly to support, and he had just tried to drug me in my own home. I stood up, my posture instantly straightening. The artificial tremor in my hands vanished. I walked over to his limp body and reached into his jacket pocket. I needed to know exactly what he had given me. My fingers brushed against a small, crumpled foil packet. I pulled it out and read the label. It was a high-dose commercial sedative, a heavy-duty tranquilizer typically reserved for patients undergoing severe psychological episodes. This was not something you buy over the counter. This was something you acquire with malicious intent. My heart pounded, a cold, calculated anger replacing the initial shock. I reached into his other pocket and pulled out his cell phone. Cameron was careless. He had never changed his passcode from the year he was born. I unlocked the screen and immediately went to his messages. The most recent thread was with Heather, his wife. Heather was a 32-year-old corporate finance director, a white woman whose crisp suits and polite smiles hid a deeply manipulative nature. I scrolled up, reading their exchange from just an hour ago. "Did you get the powder?" she had written. "Yes," Cameron had replied. "It is enough to knock out a horse. I am putting it in his tea now." Then came her response, a message so cold it chilled me to the bone. "Good. Make sure he drinks all of it. We need him completely out of his mind and compliant. The notary is already on his way." I stared at the screen, the words burning into my mind. A notary. They were not trying to kill me. They were trying to incapacitate me to force a signature. They wanted my assets. What they did not know was that the modest pension and the suburban house they were after were merely a fraction of the truth. 40 years ago, I sold a series of tech patents and placed the millions into a secure, silent trust. They thought they were robbing a poor old widower, unaware they were attempting to defraud a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I slipped the phone back into Cameron's pocket and placed the empty foil packet on the side table. My mind raced, analyzing the variables. If Heather had arranged for a notary, they were likely aiming for a power of attorney or a property transfer deed. They wanted legal control over my life and my supposed meager savings. I could have called the police right then. I had the drugged son, the packet, the texts. But calling the police now would only result in a minor charge for Cameron. Heather would deny everything, claiming her husband acted alone. I needed to see exactly how far they were willing to go. I needed to trap them so deeply in their own web of fraud that they would never be able to escape. I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway outside. Someone was approaching the house. I quickly moved back to my armchair, sitting down heavily and letting my shoulders slump. I relaxed my facial muscles, letting my jaw hang slightly slack, practicing the vacant, confused stare of an elderly man slipping into severe dementia. The doorbell rang, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the tension in the room. I did not move. I let it ring a second time, then a third. Finally, I heard a heavy knock on the back door near the kitchen. They were trying to be discreet. I slowly stood up, shuffling my feet across the hardwood floor, dragging my slippers to make as much noise as possible. I leaned heavily against the wall as I made my way through the dining room. I reached the back door and fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I pulled the door open just a crack, peering out with wide, unfocused eyes. "Who is there?" I mumbled, slurring my words slightly perfectly, mimicking the effects of the sedative Cameron had intended for me. "Where is my son? I want my wife." My wife passed away over a decade ago, but the mention of her would convince anyone that my mind was completely gone. I stared at the man standing on my back porch. He was wearing a cheap, wrinkled suit, holding a leather briefcase tightly against his chest. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around the quiet suburban neighborhood before settling on me. "Mr. Mitchell," the man asked, his voice low and rushed. "I am the notary. Heather sent me. She said Cameron would have everything ready for you to sign." He pushed the door open a little wider, stepping into the kitchen without an invitation. I stumbled backward, putting a hand to my forehead as if the room were spinning. "Sign? Sign what? I do not understand." I feel so dizzy, I whispered, leaning heavily against the kitchen counter. The notary pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase and slapped them onto the kitchen island. "Just a few signatures to help your son manage your care, old man," he said callously, pulling a blue pen from his pocket. Right as he uncapped the pen, my smartwatch hidden under the cuff of my cardigan vibrated. It was a notification from the security app connected to my home network. I had synced Cameron's phone to my alerts months ago when he kept complaining about losing it. The alert displayed a new, urgent text message from Heather to Cameron's phone. "Is the drug working? The notary is waiting at the back door. Open it now. I am pulling into the driveway. Get his thumbprint if he cannot hold the pen. Do not mess this up, Cameron." The notary shoved this blue pen into my trembling hand. He did not care that I was supposedly heavily sedated. He only cared about his cut of the payout. He pointed a stubby, sweating finger at the bottom of the first page. "Sign right here on the dotted line, old man," he barked, his breath smelling of stale coffee and cheap cigarettes. "Just make a mark. Any mark will do." I squinted at the documents, letting my eyes cross slightly as if I could barely read the bold print. But my vision was perfectly clear. I read the header: "Durable power of attorney and full financial proxy." They were attempting to seize control of my medical decisions, my bank accounts, and my property deeds in one sweeping motion. This man was not a legitimate public official. He was a paid accomplice in a criminal conspiracy against a senior citizen. "Where is my boy?" I whined, letting the pen slip through my fingers and clatter onto the granite countertop. "I cannot sign anything without my son. He takes care of my papers." My head hurt so much. The notary cursed under his breath, violently retrieving the pen. "Your son is busy. Heather sent me. Now pick up the pen and write your name before she gets inside and yells at both of us." He grabbed my wrist, his grip painfully tight, and forced the pen back into my palm. He was crossing a legal line, committing physical battery to force a signature under duress. I let him guide my hand toward the paper, my arm vibrating with a masterfully faked tremor. I needed to destroy those original documents. Without the originals, their immediate plan would stall buying me the time I needed to execute my trap. Next to the stack of legal papers sat an open, oversized bottle of dark blue fountain pen ink that I used for writing in my journal. I swayed heavily against the kitchen island, using my entire body weight to knock the notary off balance. I let out a loud, confused groan. "My heart," I gasped, clutching my chest with my free hand. "I feel so weak." The sudden jerky movement caught the notary completely off guard. He stumbled backward, his shiny dress shoes slipping on the polished wood floor to keep from falling. As he released his iron grip on my wrist, my violently shaking right hand swung wide. I brought my hand down hard, striking the open ink bottle perfectly. The heavy glass tipped over, sending a thick, dark blue wave of permanent ink cascading directly across the entire stack of documents. The dark liquid instantly soaked through the thick paper, obliterating the carefully typed legal clauses, the signature lines, and the notary seal area. The damage was immediate and completely irreversible. The documents were ruined beyond any legal recognition. The notary shrieked in absolute panic, grabbing the dripping pages and trying to shake the ink off, but he only succeeded in splattering his cheap suit jacket and my clean kitchen floor. "What did you do, you crazy old fool?" he screamed, his face turning a blotchy red with uncontrolled fury. "Those were the only original copies. Heather is going to kill me." I took 2 steps back, covering my face with my trembling hands, cowering like a frightened child facing an angry parent. "I am sorry," I whimpered, making my voice crack with feigned terror. "I just wanted my tea." "You scared me. Why are you yelling at me?" He threw the ruined, dripping papers onto the counter in absolute disgust, wiping his stained hands on his trousers. He paced the floor in a frantic circle, muttering a string of profanities. He knew he had completely failed his part of the job. "You stay right here. Do not move a single inch," he commanded, pointing a stained finger directly at my chest. "I have to go to my car and see if I have blank proxy forms in my briefcase. I will be right back." The moment he stepped through the back door and onto the porch to head toward his vehicle, my trembling stopped entirely. My posture straightened instantly. I stepped forward, grabbed the heavy brass deadbolt, and slammed the door shut with absolute authority. I turned the lock with a sharp, satisfying click. I quickly engaged the secondary security chain and the top latch, securing the door completely from the inside. Through the small glass window at the top of the door, I watched the notary spin around, his eyes widening in pure confusion. He grabbed the handle, rattling it aggressively. "Hey, open the door!" he shouted, his voice muffled by the thick insulated glass. "Open this door right now!" I stared back at him, my face devoid of any confusion, weakness, or fear. I offered him a cold, calculated smile, raising my hand to give him a slow, mocking wave. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. His jaw dropped and he stumbled backward, finally understanding that the helpless, sedated old man was a complete and utter act. He was dealing with someone fully aware, highly intelligent, and entirely in control. He scrambled down the porch steps and sprinted toward his car, desperate to escape the property before the police arrived. I turned my attention back to the living room. Cameron was still sprawled on the armchair, completely unconscious from his own spiked tea. He was dead weight, but I had maintained excellent physical shape for a man my age. I grabbed him securely under the arms and dragged his limp body across the hallway, pulling him straight into the guest bathroom. I dropped him onto the cold, tiled floor, turned off the light, and pulled the door shut, locking it firmly from the outside. He was completely out of the equation for the next several hours. The house was fully secure. The fraudulent documents were destroyed. The fake notary was gone. I walked over to the kitchen sink and calmly washed the ink from my fingertips, drying my hands on a fresh linen towel. I checked my smartwatch again. Heather was already in the driveway. It was time for my arrogant daughter-in-law to face the very first consequence of her boundless greed. I walked quietly into the living room and stood by the front window, peering through the slight gap in the heavy curtains. Heather's sleek, silver luxury sedan was parked haphazardly in my driveway. She was sitting in the driver's seat, the engine still running. But she was not getting out of the car to execute her master plan. Instead, she was frantically pounding her fists against the steering wheel, her face contorted in absolute, unadulterated panic. Her cell phone was pressed tightly against her ear, and even through the thick, insulated glass of my front window, I could hear the shrill, piercing pitch of her screaming voice. "What do you mean my access is denied?" she shrieked, her voice echoing wildly into the quiet suburban street. "Check it again. That routing number is correct. You have to authorize the transfer right now." There was a brief, tense pause as the bank representative on the other end spoke. Heather's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, ghostly white. "Frozen," she screamed, completely losing her polished corporate composure. "What do you mean the master account is locked for suspicious activity? I need that money today, or I am going to jail." "Cameron, where are you?" She ripped the phone away from her ear, frantically typing a message. She was trapped in a financial nightmare, and she knew it. I watched through the heavy living room curtains as Heather slammed her manicured fists against the leather steering wheel of her luxury sedan. She was trapped in a financial nightmare of her own making, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the one who had just locked the front door to her escape. My decoy checking account was rigged with a hard security limit. If anyone tried to move a massive sum without my voice authorization, the system would immediately flag it as fraudulent and freeze all connected assets. Heather had clearly triggered that tripwire, but I needed to know exactly how much damage she had attempted to inflict before the banking system locked her out entirely. I turned away from the window, leaving her to her screaming fit. Cameron was still locked safely in the guest bathroom, lost in his chemically induced sleep. I grabbed my wool coat and slipped out the side door, walking briskly toward the detached garage. I slid into the driver's seat of my reliable 10-year-old sedan. As I reversed down the back alley, I could still hear Heather yelling into her phone in the front driveway, completely unhinged. I drove straight toward the local bank branch in the center of town. The drive took less than 15 minutes, but my mind worked with total clarity the entire way. They had acted with reckless, dangerous desperation. A fake notary at the back door and a rushed bank transfer meant they were running out of time. Something external was pushing Heather to steal my money today. I parked the car and walked through the heavy glass doors of the bank, ready to assess the carnage. I bypassed the main teller line, ignoring the polite greetings from the staff, and walked directly toward the glass-walled office of the branch manager, Richard. I had known him for nearly a decade. He was a meticulous, rule-following man who handled my visible, everyday finances. He had absolutely no knowledge of my multi-million-dollar corporate trust, believing I was just a comfortable retiree living on a modest, fixed pension. As I knocked sharply and opened his door, Richard looked up from his computer monitor. The blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him a chalky white. "Mr. Mitchell," he stammered, standing up so quickly his heavy leather chair rolled backward and slammed into the wall. "You are here. I thought you were in the intensive care unit." I closed the office door behind me and sat down in the guest chair, keeping my posture completely straight and my gaze sharp. "I am perfectly healthy, Richard. I need a full, immediate printout of every single transaction on my personal savings account from the last 48 hours. Richard swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his computer mouse. He typed furiously, his eyes darting nervously between the glowing screen and my face. "Mr. Mitchell, I received a frantic call early this morning from your daughter-in-law, Heather. She provided a signed medical proxy and stated you had suffered a severe incapacitating stroke. She presented legal authorization to wire the entirety of your savings, exactly $40,000, to an external account to cover emergency medical flight expenses." I stared at him, my expression hardening into stone. My $40,000 decoy savings. The nest egg I kept visible specifically to throw greedy relatives off the scent of my real wealth. It was completely gone. "And you authorized this massive transfer without calling me directly?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Richard wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "The documentation looked absolutely perfect, sir, but that is not even the worst part of it. When she initiated the wire, she also expedited a rush mortgage application against your property. She requested an immediate cash-out refinance loan for $300,000. The wire for the savings triggered our internal fraud alert because it was directed to an offshore crypto exchange which froze her access. But the mortgage application was already processed by the lending department. The funds are scheduled to be released to her by the end of business today. Print the authorization forms right now," I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or delay. "I want to see the medical proxy and the mortgage application she submitted to this bank." Richard scrambled to the printer on his credenza, grabbing the warm sheets of paper and sliding them across the mahogany desk toward me. I picked up the documents and pulled my reading glasses from my chest pocket. I scrutinized the bottom of the pages. There, resting perfectly on the signature line, was my name. It was not a sloppy, rushed forgery done by an amateur. It was a terrifyingly accurate reproduction of my handwriting. The loops, the slant, the pressure points on the paper, they all looked incredibly authentic. But Cameron did not have the brains, the patience, or the steady hand for this level of white-collar crime. This was purely Heather. As a corporate finance director, she handled high-level contracts and massive budgets daily. She knew exactly how to manipulate legal paperwork and bypass institutional safeguards without raising red flags. I looked closer, tracing the blue ink with my index finger. She had used a digital overlay from an old tax return Cameron had supposedly helped me file last year. I pointed to the signature on the mortgage document and tapped the paper firmly. "Look right here, Richard. Notice the slight, unnatural hesitation at the top of the letter M. The ink pools just a fraction of a millimeter more than it should. A natural signature flows with continuous kinetic momentum. This is a traced forgery executed through a light box or a high-resolution vector print." I slid the papers back across the desk to him. I am sitting right in front of you, completely lucid, speaking clearly, and entirely healthy. I am officially declaring this a criminal fraud. You will halt the release of those mortgage funds immediately and report the $40,000 wire theft to your federal fraud division." Richard nodded vigorously, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he opened the emergency stop protocols. "Absolutely, Mr. Mitchell. I am flagging the loan disbursement right now. We will lock down the $300,000 before it leaves the escrow account." I watched him type, feeling a grim satisfaction. Heather thought she had outsmarted a helpless old man, but she had just committed massive bank fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft in a single morning. Richard hit the final key to freeze the transaction, letting out a heavy sigh of relief that echoed in the quiet office. He clicked over to the next screen to pull up the property deed attached to the fraudulent loan application, intending to officially sever it from my banking profile. Suddenly, his hands froze completely over the keyboard. The relief vanished from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. He stared at the monitor, his mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. "What is it?" I demanded, leaning forward in my chair, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Richard slowly turned the computer monitor around so it faced me directly. He pointed a shaking finger at the digital copy of the county property records displayed on the screen. "Mr. Mitchell, I can stop the bank from releasing the funds today, but I cannot cancel the mortgage application entirely. The fraud department will not accept your claim of unauthorized borrowing on this specific property." I narrowed my eyes, reading the stark black text on the glowing screen. "Why not?" Richard looked at me with genuine terror in his eyes, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Because according to the county registry filed and stamped 2 days ago, you are not the legal owner of this house anymore. The deed shows the property was legally and irrevocably transferred entirely into Heather's name." I stared at the computer monitor, the stark reality of Heather's audacity burning into my vision. I did not waste another second arguing with the terrified bank manager. I turned on my heel, walked out of the glass office, and strode straight through the lobby doors. The cold morning air hit my face, matching the absolute freezing anger settling in my chest. Heather thought she had executed a flawless legal maneuver, stealing the very roof over my head. But she had no idea who she was actually dealing with. I got back into my sedan and drove toward the industrial district on the edge of the city. I bypassed the towering glass skyscrapers where corporate attorneys paraded in expensive suits. Instead, I pulled up to a nondescript brick building tucked behind a heavy iron gate. This was the office of Robert Gallagher. He was not just a lawyer. He was a legal predator, an underground financial strategist who handled the complex, shadowy mechanics of my multi-million-dollar trust. I walked past the unmarked receptionist desk and pushed open the heavy oak door to his private office. Gallagher was sitting behind a massive slab of mahogany, a tumbler of neat bourbon resting next to a stack of heavily redacted contracts. He looked up, his sharp, predatory eyes locking onto mine. He did not ask how I was doing or offer pleasantries. He took one look at my rigid posture and set his pen down. "You only come here when someone has made a fatal miscalculation, Mitchell," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Who do we need to ruin today?" "My own daughter-in-law," I replied, taking the heavy leather chair across from him. I laid the bank printouts flat on his desk. She just attempted to drain my decoy savings and initiated a $300,000 cash-out refinance on my property. But the bank manager just informed me the county registry shows the house was legally transferred into her name 2 days ago. I need to know exactly how she filed that deed without my presence or consent. Gallagher did not blink. He swiveled toward his multi-monitor setup, his fingers flying across his mechanical keyboard with lethal precision. He bypassed the public county websites, logging directly into a restricted legal database that tracked property title histories in real time. Within seconds, a high-resolution scan of a quitclaim deed appeared on his largest screen. He rotated the monitor so I could see the document. I leaned forward, inspecting the paperwork that supposedly stripped me of my home. The document claimed that I had willingly relinquished all ownership rights to Heather for the sum of $1 single. It was notarized by a digital stamp likely acquired through the dark web or a bribed official. But that was not what made my blood run entirely cold. I scanned the bottom of the page, looking at the 2 signatures required to release the property title. The first signature was a flawless forgery of my own handwriting. The second signature belonged to Josephine, my beautiful, fiercely intelligent wife who had passed away over a decade ago. I felt a sharp, agonizing twist in my gut. Heather had not just stolen from a living man. She had desecrated the memory of a dead woman. She dug up an old archived document, most likely a decades-old mortgage agreement she found snooping through my filing cabinets, and traced my late wife's signature to bypass the marital property laws. She actually forged a dead woman's signature to steal my home, I whispered, my voice vibrating with a dark, unyielding rage. She dug through Josephine's old paperwork just to trace her handwriting. She has absolutely no boundaries. Gallagher zoomed in on the digital signature, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the ink patterns. This is corporate-level fraud, Mitchell. She used a high-grade digital vector to replicate both signatures perfectly. The county clerk's office processes thousands of these deeds daily through automated electronic filing systems. Unless someone specifically flags the document for manual review, the software simply verifies the formatting and rubber stamps the transfer. She knew exactly how to exploit the automated system. She thought she committed the perfect crime. Gallagher leaned back in his chair, swirling the bourbon in his glass. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face, the kind of smile a wolf gives right before snapping the trap shut on its prey. She is a finance director, Mitchell. She is smart enough to bypass a county filing system, but she is incredibly stupid for assuming she knew your financial portfolio. He clicked a few keys, pulling up a completely different set of encrypted records. Look at this original property deed, the real one. Do you remember what we did 10 years ago, right after Josephine passed away? I looked at the screen, the memories of our strategic financial planning rushing back. I wanted to protect the estate from any potential probate issues or greedy distant relatives. We removed the house from my personal name entirely. Exactly, Gallagher confirmed, tapping the screen. 10 years ago, we executed a blind trust transfer. We placed this property into a holding company, a completely anonymous limited liability company registered in Delaware. That LLC is a subsidiary of your primary $10 million tech patent portfolio. You do not personally own that house, Mitchell. Your corporation owns it. Therefore, this quitclaim deed Heather just filed is fundamentally impossible. I let the reality of his words sink in. Heather had forged a transfer deed moving the property from my name to hers. But my name had not been on the actual legal title for a decade. She forged the transfer of an asset that did not even exist in the personal capacity she claimed. So the deed she filed is completely worthless, I stated, a cold satisfaction creeping into my chest. Gallagher laughed, a harsh grating sound. Worthless for claiming the property, yes, but incredibly valuable for us. By filing this document electronically across state lines, she just committed federal wire fraud. By forging a dead person's signature on a legal county document, she committed felony, identity theft, and perjury. And by attempting to secure a $300,000 loan against a property she does not actually own, she committed massive bank fraud. She did not steal your house, Mitchell. She just signed a full, unassailable confession to multiple federal crimes. The bank system froze the loan today because the names did not match their internal underwriting software, not because she beat you. She trapped herself. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with devastating perfection. Heather had meticulously built her own prison, dragging my treacherous son down right alongside her. They thought they were dealing with a vulnerable, easily manipulated old man. They had no idea they had just attacked a heavily fortified corporate entity, triggering a series of federal offenses that would ruin them both permanently. Gallagher finished his bourbon, setting the heavy glass down on the mahogany desk with a loud, definitive thud. He pulled a fresh legal pad from his drawer and uncapped his premium fountain pen. He looked across the desk at me, the predatory gleam in his eyes burning brighter than before. "The trap is already closed around her ankle," Mitchell Gallagher said softly. "I can draft the injunctions right now. I can contact my associates at the FBI and have her arrested for corporate fraud before lunch. I can freeze every single asset she has ever touched." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, interlacing his fingers. "Or we can let her sweat. We can let her believe she still has a way out right up until the very moment we pull the rug out from under her and take absolutely everything. So tell me, my friend, how exactly do you want to destroy them?" I looked Gallagher dead in the eye, my decision already made. "We let them dig the hole deeper," I said softly. "Prepare the injunctions and draft the federal complaints, but hold the strike. I want to see her look of absolute triumph right before the floor caves in." Gallagher nodded, a predatory smirk lingering on his face as I stood up and left his office. I drove back to my neighborhood, my mind calculating the next variables. As I turned onto my street, my dashboard screen flashed with an incoming call from my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Higgins. "Mitchell," she said, her voice trembling with concern. "There is an ambulance parked in your driveway. Heather is outside talking to 2 paramedics. Are you all right?" I slowed my car to a crawl, pulling over a block away from my house to assess the situation. An ambulance. Of course. Heather realized her forged deed and bank transfers were hitting administrative walls. If she could not steal my assets from under my nose instantly, her backup plan was to declare me legally incompetent and have me committed to a psychiatric facility. I thanked Mrs. Higgins, ended the call, and parked my sedan out of sight. I walked the remaining distance, slipping through the back alley to observe. A private transport van painted to look like an official city ambulance idled in my driveway. 2 massive, heavily tattooed men in generic medical scrubs stood by the back doors. They were not real paramedics. They were hired muscle, likely from a shady, underfunded nursing facility Heather had bribed to forcefully extract me. I took a deep breath, instantly dropping my shoulders and relaxing my jaw. I let my hands tremble slightly as I stumbled out from the alleyway and onto the front lawn. Heather spotted me immediately. She pointed a sharp, perfectly manicured finger in my direction. "There he is," she shouted to the 2 men, her voice dripping with fake, exaggerated panic. "He has been wandering the streets. His dementia is getting worse by the hour." The 2 massive men stepped forward, cutting off any potential escape route. I shrank back, putting my hands up defensively. "What is happening?" I stammered, making my voice sound weak and reedy. "Heather, where is my son? Why are these men at my house?" Heather rushed forward, grabbing my arm with a grip that bruised my skin. "It is going to be okay, Mitchell," she said loudly, making sure the nosy neighbors peeking through their blinds could hear her performance. "You are very sick. You wandered off again. These nice men are going to take you to a special care facility where you will be safe." One of the fake paramedics grabbed my other arm, his thick fingers digging into my bicep. "Come on, old-timer," he grunted, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. "Let us get you into the back. Nice and easy." I could have fought them. I could have screamed for the neighbors to call the real police, but that would only delay the inevitable and give Heather a chance to spin the narrative. I needed to isolate these hired thugs and flip them. "I do not want to go," I whimpered, deliberately stumbling on the driveway gravel. "Please, I just want my tea." Heather shoved me roughly toward the open back doors of the van. "Get him inside before he causes a scene," she hissed at the men, completely dropping her concerned daughter-in-law act. They hoisted me up into the back of the transport van, sitting me down heavily on the cold vinyl stretcher. The interior smelled of cheap bleach and old sweat. One of the men climbed in the back with me, securing a thick nylon strap across my chest, while the other moved to the driver's seat. Heather stood at the bumper, offering me a cold, victorious sneer. "Do not worry about the house, Mitchell," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with pure malice. "Cameron and I will take excellent care of everything you left behind." She slammed the heavy metal doors shut, plunging the back of the van into dim, claustrophobic shadows. The engine roared to life and the vehicle lurched forward, pulling out of my driveway and heading toward whatever illicit facility Heather had paid off. We drove for about 10 minutes in complete silence. The thug sitting across from me was busy scrolling through his smartphone, completely ignoring his supposed patient. I waited until the GPS map on his screen showed we were on the interstate far away from my neighborhood and Heather's watchful eyes. Then I unclipped the heavy nylon strap across my chest with one swift, fluid motion. The loud click echoed in the back of the van. The thug snapped his head up, his eyes widening in surprise as I sat up perfectly straight. "Hey!" he barked, reaching out to push me back down. "Stay seated, old man." I caught his wrist mid-air. My grip was like a steel vise fueled by decades of discipline and a cold, burning rage. He gasped, trying to pull his arm back, but I held him locked in place. "My name is Mitchell," I said, my voice dropping the frail, reedy tone and resonating with absolute commanding authority. "And you are currently committing felony kidnapping across county lines, which carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years in federal prison." The man froze, his bravado instantly evaporating. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, pulling his wrist free as I released him. "Your daughter-in-law signed the medical proxy. This is a legal transport." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened a digital dossier Gallagher had compiled and sent to me just moments before. Heather forged that proxy using a dead woman's signature. I stated, clearly turning the screen so he could see the glaring evidence, which means your transport order is entirely fraudulent. Furthermore, I know exactly who you two are. You do not work for the state. You work for a private, unlicensed care home on the South Side that has been cited 3 times this year for Medicare fraud. Heather paid you $5,000 in cash to extract me without a doctor's signature. The man in the back went completely pale. He banged his fist against the partition window. "Pull over, Marcus," he yelled to the driver. "Pull the damn van over right now." The vehicle swerved onto the gravel shoulder of the highway, coming to a harsh, sudden stop. The driver slid the partition window open, looking back with wide, panicked eyes. "What is going on?" the driver demanded. I looked at both of them, my expression completely ruthless. "What is going on is that you two have just stepped into the middle of a massive federal fraud investigation. My lawyers have already logged your license plate and your faces. If I do not check in with them in the next 10 minutes, they will dispatch the FBI to your facility." The 2 men stared at me, the color entirely drained from their faces. They were cheap, low-level muscle, completely unequipped to handle a corporate-level legal threat. They realized instantly that Heather had set them up to take the fall for a massive kidnapping charge. "Look, man," the driver stammered, raising his hands in surrender. "We did not know. The lady just gave us an envelope of cash and told us you were a violent dementia patient. We do not want any federal trouble. We will let you out right here. You can walk away." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "I am not walking anywhere," I said, leaning back against the vinyl stretcher and adjusting my coat. "You accepted a cash bribe to abduct a senior citizen from his own property. You are already neck-deep in this trouble." I locked eyes with the driver through the partition window, my voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "I am going to give you exactly 1 chance to walk away from this without wearing handcuffs. Put this vehicle in drive. You are going to turn this van around, and you are going to drive me straight back to my house. But before we get there, you are going to hand me those fake transport uniforms." The cold porcelain of the guest bathroom floor pressed against Cameron's cheek. He groaned a low, guttural sound echoing in the small, dark space. His eyelids felt like they were lined with lead, and a violent wave of nausea churned in his stomach. The heavy psychiatric sedative he had intended for me was finally loosening its grip, leaving behind a crushing headache and severe disorientation. He dragged himself upward, his fingers desperately clawing at the edge of the sink until he managed to heave himself over the toilet. As he retched, the locked bathroom door suddenly rattled, then clicked open with a sharp snap. The harsh hallway light flooded the cramped room, blinding him temporarily. Heather stood in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, staring down at her husband with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. She did not kneel to help him. She did not ask if he was all right. Instead, she kicked the sole of his shoe with the pointed toe of her designer heel. "Get up, you absolute idiot," she hissed, her voice vibrating with venom. "How could you possibly be stupid enough to drink your own spiked tea? You left me out there to handle everything alone." Cameron blinked sluggishly, wiping his mouth with the back of his trembling hand. "My head," he mumbled, his tongue still thick and uncoordinated. "The tea. I do not understand. Where is my dad? Where is the notary?" Heather let out a sharp, mocking laugh that bounced off the bathroom tiles. "The notary ran out of here covered in permanent ink because you were too busy taking a nap on the bathroom floor to control a frail old man," she snapped. "He ruined the proxy documents. He ruined everything. I had to scramble to fix your massive failure." Cameron finally managed to pull himself up, leaning heavily against the doorframe, his face a sickly shade of gray. "Fix it," he repeated, his confusion evident. "How did you fix it?" "The house. The bank accounts. We need that money today, Heather." Heather grabbed his arm and yanked him out of the bathroom, pulling him into the hallway. She pushed him toward the living room, her earlier panic completely replaced by a terrifying, arrogant pride. "I fixed it by doing what you never have the guts to do, Cameron. I called my contacts. I paid $5,000 in cash to a private transport company. Your father is gone." Cameron stopped dead in his tracks, leaning against the wall for support. "Gone. Gone where?" To a locked psychiatric facility on the South Side, she declared, a victorious smirk spreading across her face. 2 men loaded him into the back of a van 10 minutes ago. He was shaking, crying, and totally confused. He looked completely pathetic. Once he is processed into that ward, no one will listen to a single word he says. He is officially a ward of the state now, which means as his next of kin, we can petition the court for emergency financial control by tomorrow morning. We won't even need the notary. We won. The heavy fog in Cameron's brain seemed to clear, slightly pierced by the sharp jolt of pure greed. He let out a breathless, uneven laugh, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "You got him committed. You actually did it. Heather, you are a genius." I am the only one in this marriage who thinks under pressure, she replied coldly, walking over to the large mahogany dining table. But we do not have time to stand around congratulating each other. We have to move fast. I have a cash buyer coming to look at this property first thing in the morning. We need to stage this place so it looks like a modern home ready for a quick flip, not a dusty museum dedicated to your dead mother. Heather grabbed a thick black trash bag from the kitchen pantry and snapped it open with a loud, aggressive rustle. She walked straight over to the antique wooden mantel above the fireplace. It was the space where I kept my most cherished memories of Josephine. Framed wedding photographs, the delicate porcelain figurine she had collected over 30 years, and the hand-stitched quilt she had draped over the armchair. Heather showed absolutely no hesitation. She swept her arm across the mantel, knocking a silver-framed photo of Josephine into the trash bag. Cameron watched her for a second, a brief flash of hesitation crossing his face. "That is my mother's stuff," he murmured weakly. "Your mother is dead, and your father is locked in a padded cell." Heather snapped back, throwing a beautiful porcelain dove into the bag where it shattered with a muffled crunch. "This junk is making the house look dated and unsellable. If we want top dollar from the investors tomorrow, all of this sentimental trash has to go. Grab a bag and start clearing out the display cabinets. Do not just stand there." The last shred of Cameron's filial loyalty vanished, entirely consumed by his desperate need for money. He nodded slowly, grabbing another trash bag. He moved toward the display cabinet, ruthlessly dumping the photo albums, the handmade anniversary cards, and the small tokens of a 40-year marriage into the dark plastic. They moved through my living room like scavengers, laughing and joking as they erased decades of love and history. They mocked the old-fashioned curtains. They joked about how easily they had outsmarted me. They were completely intoxicated by their own perceived brilliance. To celebrate their victory, Heather walked over to my private liquor cabinet. She bypassed the cheap bottles and pulled out a rare, expensive vintage red wine I had been saving for a special occasion. She found 2 crystal glasses and popped the cork, pouring a generous amount into each. She handed a glass to Cameron, holding her own up in the air. To early inheritances she proposed, her eyes gleaming with malice. And to the fastest real estate flip in Atlanta. Cameron clinked his glass against hers, a wide, greedy smile returning to his pale face. To us, he agreed, taking a long, triumphant sip of the rich red wine. They stood in the center of my living room, surrounded by black trash bags filled with my wife's belongings, completely comfortable in the home they believed they had just stolen. Then the heavy brass deadbolt on the front door clicked loudly. The sound was sharp, metallic, and utterly impossible in their minds. The doorknob turned, and the heavy oak door swung open with a slow, deliberate creak. Heather froze her wine glass, stopping halfway to her lips. Cameron turned around, his eyes widening in absolute terror. I stepped over the threshold, closing the door firmly behind me. I was not trembling. I was not looking confused. My posture was perfectly straight, and my expression was as cold and hard as granite. In my right hand, I held a balled-up pile of cheap, generic medical scrubs, the fake uniforms of the thugs Heather had hired to kidnap me. I tossed the scrubs onto the hardwood floor. They landed with a soft, heavy thud right at Heather's designer heels. "You should really ask for a refund from your private transport company," I said, my voice echoing with quiet, terrifying authority. "Their drivers are remarkably easy to persuade when faced with 20 years in federal prison." Heather's jaw dropped. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost. She stumbled backward, the wine glass slipping from her fingers and shattering against the floor, splattering dark red liquid across the baseboards. Cameron backed up until his spine hit the wall, his breathing ragged. "Dad," he choked out, his voice cracking with fear. "How did you get back?" I ignored his question, my eyes locking onto the half-empty glass of wine still trembling in his hand. I looked at his sweaty forehead, noting the residual paleness from the heavy tranquilizer still pulsing through his bloodstream. "I would put that glass down if I were you, Cameron," I advised, offering him a slow, chilling smile. A heavy dose of commercial psychiatric sedatives combined with alcohol is a highly volatile mixture. Red wine mixed with that specific drug will cause immediate cardiac arrest, my dear son. Have you started feeling the tightness in your chest yet? Cameron dropped his glass. The fragile crystal shattered against the hardwood floor, sending a spray of dark red wine across his shoes. His hands flew to his chest. He gasped for air, his eyes wide with a sudden suffocating panic. The psychological suggestion alone was enough to trigger a massive anxiety attack. He stumbled backward, clutching his shirt, genuinely believing his heart was about to stop. He slid down the wall, curling into a pathetic, trembling ball on the floor. Heather looked at her husband groveling on the floor, then snapped her gaze back to me. The arrogant smirk was entirely gone. She was backed into a corner, her fake notary exposed, her kidnapping plot dismantled, and her husband completely incapacitated by his own fear. A desperate animal is a dangerous animal. I saw the exact moment her corporate, calculating mind switched to pure, unhinged survival mode. If she could not steal my assets through administrative fraud, she would use the authorities to physically remove me from the house. She raised her hands, her long, sharp acrylic nails hovering near her own face. Without a single second of hesitation, she dug her nails into her left cheek and dragged them violently downward. 4 deep, angry red scratches instantly welled up with blood. She did not even wince. She grabbed her smartphone from the dining table, smeared a drop of her own blood across her forehead to make the injury look worse, and dialed 911. "Help me!" she screamed into the phone, her voice instantly transforming into the hysterical, terrified wail of a battered woman. "Please send the police right now. My father-in-law has lost his mind. He has dementia. He just attacked me. He clawed my face and he is threatening my husband. We are trapped in the living room and I think he has a weapon. Please hurry." She ended the call and threw the phone onto the sofa. She looked at me, a victorious, wicked gleam returning to her eyes. "You think you are so smart, old man," she spat, wiping a streak of blood from her cheek. "When the cops get here, they are going to see a bleeding, terrified woman and a confused, violent senior citizen. They will put you in a psychiatric hold so fast your head will spin. And once you are locked in the state ward, I will get emergency conservatorship by tomorrow morning." I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my smartphone, keeping my posture perfectly relaxed. Within 5 minutes, the wail of police sirens pierced the quiet suburban evening. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the front windows, casting harsh, moving shadows across the living room walls. Heavy footsteps pounded up the front porch steps, and loud, authoritative knocking shook the front door. Heather immediately threw herself onto the floor next to the shattered wine glass. She curled her knees to her chest and began to sob uncontrollably, burying her face in her hands. I walked over and calmly unlocked the front door, pulling it wide open. 2 patrol officers burst into the entryway, their hands hovering cautiously near their duty belts. They took one look at Heather crying and bleeding on the floor and immediately turned their stern, commanding glares toward me. "Sir, step back and keep your hands where we can see them," the lead officer commanded, positioning himself between me and Heather. The second officer knelt beside her. "Ma'am, are you all right? Did he do this to you?" "Yes," Heather sobbed, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "He has severe dementia. He became violent out of nowhere. He attacked me, and he forced my husband to drink something toxic. Look at Cameron. He is barely breathing. Please, you have to take him away before he kills us." The lead officer took a step closer to me, reaching for the handcuffs at his waist. "Sir, I am going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. We are taking you in for a psychological evaluation and aggravated assault." I held my hands up, palms facing forward, perfectly steady. "Officer, before you make a terrible mistake and subject your department to a massive wrongful arrest lawsuit, I highly suggest you look at my fingernails," I said, my voice calm, deep, and resonating with absolute clarity. The officer paused, his brow furrowing. "Look closely," I continued. "You will find absolutely no blood, no skin tissue, and no sign of a physical struggle. Now I want you to look at the 65-inch television screen mounted on the wall right behind you." I tapped a single button on my smartphone. The large television screen instantly blinked to life, casting a bright, high-definition glow across the room. I had synced my hidden living room security cameras to my private network weeks ago. The video file I had selected began to play flawlessly. The officers turned their heads. The high-resolution footage showed the entire living room from a wide, clear angle. The audio was crisp. The officers watched in stunned silence as the video played Cameron dropping the sedative powder into my tea mug. They heard Heather berating her husband, throwing my late wife's precious belongings into garbage bags and celebrating their fraudulent kidnapping plot. And then came the undeniable climax. The footage clearly showed me standing perfectly still near the door, while Heather raised her own hands, dug her acrylic nails into her own cheek, and violently scratched her own face. It captured her smearing the blood on her forehead before dialing 911 to perform her hysterical, fabricated plea for help. The heavy silence in the living room was suddenly broken only by the sound of Heather's sharp, panicked gasps. The lead officer turned his head, slowly shifting his gaze from the television screen back to Heather. His expression had transformed from protective concern to absolute freezing disgust. He slowly removed his hand from his handcuffs and gestured to his partner. "Ma'am, stand up right now," the lead officer ordered, his voice echoing with uncompromising authority. Heather scrambled backward, her expensive skirt catching on the hardwood floor. "No, wait," she stammered, her corporate poise shattering into a million pieces. "That video is manipulated. It is an artificial intelligence deepfake. He is a retired tech guy. He fabricated that footage to frame me. You have to believe me." The second officer did not hesitate. He grabbed Heather by the arm, hauling her to her feet with swift professional force. "Save it for the judge, lady," he snapped, pulling her arms behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking around Heather's wrists was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. "You have the right to remain silent," the lead officer recited, stepping right into Heather's face. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You are being placed under arrest for filing a false police report, misuse of the 911 emergency system, and attempted elder abuse." Heather let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She thrashed against the officer's grip, her designer shoes slipping on the floor. "You cannot arrest me. I am a corporate finance director. I have a career. Cameron, do something." Cameron was still curled on the floor, trembling violently as he clutched his chest. The lead officer looked down at him with utter contempt. "Your husband is not going to help you, ma'am. Judging by the footage we just watched, he is also facing felony charges for the attempted poisoning and drugging of a senior citizen. Paramedics are on their way to clear him medically, and then he is going straight into a holding cell right next to you." The reality of the situation crashed down on Heather. The arrogant, untouchable corporate executive was now a bleeding, handcuffed criminal standing in the middle of a trashed living room. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. She finally realized that every single move she had made was anticipated, monitored, and used to build an inescapable legal cage. The officers began to pull Heather toward the front door, preparing to haul Cameron up next. But as they moved, I raised my right hand, stepping firmly into the center of the room. "Officers, wait," I said, my voice echoing through the tense silence. "Stop right there." The lead officer paused, looking back at me with genuine confusion. "Sir, you have them dead to rights. We have video evidence of a false police report, attempted poisoning, and elder abuse. They belong in jail tonight." I looked at Heather, whose tear-streaked, bleeding face was frozen in shock. I looked at Cameron, my treacherous son, who was staring up at me with pathetic, pleading eyes. I shook my head slowly. "I am declining to press charges for the events that occurred in this house tonight," I stated clearly. "Unlock her handcuffs. I do not want them arrested." The second officer frowned, clearly frustrated. "Mr. Mitchell, with all due respect, these people are dangerous. They just tried to frame you for a violent crime. If we let them walk, they will try something worse tomorrow." I stepped closer to Heather, towering over her, as the officer reluctantly unclicked the metal cuffs from her wrists. Heather rubbed her bruised arms, staring at me as if I were a ghost. She could not comprehend why I had just saved her from a prison cell. "I am not letting them go because I am forgiving them," I said to the officers, keeping my eyes locked dead onto Heather's terrified face. "I am letting them go because a simple night in a county jail holding cell is far too merciful for what they have done." Once the baffled police officers finally exited the house, leaving the front door closed behind them, the heavy, suffocating silence returned. Heather and Cameron stared at me, trembling like cornered prey. I walked over to the mahogany side table, picked up a thick, unmarked manila folder, and threw it hard onto the coffee table right in front of them. "I did not save you from the police." "Heather," I whispered, my voice dripping with absolute menace. "I just wanted to make sure you were entirely available for your corporate auditors on Monday morning. Let us talk about the $500,000 you embezzled from your company." The heavy manila folder hit the glass coffee table with a sharp, resounding smack that made both of them flinch violently. Heather stared at the thick stack of papers spilling out from the edges, her breath catching painfully in her throat. The bleeding scratches on her cheek, which she had inflicted upon herself just 20 minutes prior to frame me, were now drying into dark, jagged lines against her pale skin. She looked absolutely pathetic. Cameron was still propped up against the baseboard, clutching his chest, his eyes darting frantically between his wife and the physical evidence resting on the table. The heavy commercial-grade sedative was still working its way out of his system, leaving him pale and covered in a cold sweat, but he was slowly realizing that the narrative he had believed was entirely fabricated. He thought they were just greedy children securing an early inheritance to fund a lavish lifestyle. He had absolutely no idea his wife was a desperate criminal trying to cover up a massive felony. I slowly lowered myself into my leather armchair, resting my hands on my knees with perfect, terrifying composure. I looked at Heather, letting the absolute terror marinate in the quiet living room. You really thought I was just a blind, naive old man waiting to be pushed into a nursing home? I said, my voice echoing off the walls with clinical precision. You thought you were the smartest person in the room, but while you were busy plotting to steal my modest pension and stage a fake kidnapping, my legal associates were busy tearing your entire professional life apart layer by layer. Go ahead, Heather. Open the folder. Read the financial death warrant you wrote for yourself. She hesitated, her manicured fingers trembling uncontrollably as she reached forward. She flipped open the heavy cardboard cover, her eyes scanning the highlighted lines of the top document. The remaining color completely drained from her face, leaving her a sickly, translucent white. She let out a sharp, suffocating gasp, dropping the paper back onto the table as if the ink had physically burned her skin. "What is it?" Cameron croaked from the floor, trying and failing to push himself up on his shaky legs. "What does it say, Heather?" I did not wait for her to answer him. I recited the facts from memory, driving each word into her chest like a stake. "It says that over the past 14 months, your brilliant, highly respected corporate finance director wife has been systematically siphoning funds from her employer. She bypassed the internal dual authorization protocols and funneled exactly $512,000 into a series of untraceable offshore shell accounts." Heather opened her mouth to deny it, but no words came out. She just let out a wet, ragged sob, but she did not stop there. I continued my gaze, never leaving her terrified, tear-streaked face. She took that stolen corporate capital and dumped every single penny of it into a high-risk cryptocurrency exchange. She was absolutely convinced she could ride a market surge, double the stolen money, quietly return the original funds to the company ledger and walk away incredibly rich. Instead, the market suffered a catastrophic crash. The crypto exchange collapsed entirely and the money vanished into the digital void. She lost it all. Cameron stared at his wife, his jaw dropping in absolute horror. "You stole $500,000 from your company," he whispered, his voice cracking with betrayal. "You told me we were just leveraging Dad's assets to upgrade our lifestyle and pay off some credit cards. You never said you were facing a federal prison sentence." Heather squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her ruined face, unable to look her husband in the eye. "And here's the truly beautiful part of this entire tragedy," I said, leaning forward in my chair to ensure she heard every single syllable. "My legal investigator, Robert Gallagher, uncovered the internal memos from your corporate headquarters. Your company is conducting a full, comprehensive external audit starting bright and early this coming Monday morning. They are bringing in ruthless forensic accountants. The second they open your departmental ledgers, they will find the gaping $500,000 hole you left behind. That is why you were so incredibly desperate today. That is why you hired fake paramedics and forged a transfer deed with my dead wife's signature. You needed liquid cash immediately to replace the stolen funds before the auditors arrived. You did not want my house because you hated me. You wanted my house because you are 48 hours away from being indicted for federal embezzlement." Heather collapsed entirely, her knees hitting the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with loud, uncontrollable sobs. The pristine, arrogant corporate executive who had mocked my late wife's belongings just an hour ago was completely gone. In her place was a broken, terrified criminal staring down a 20-year federal prison sentence. It was a mistake, she wailed, looking up at me with dark mascara running down her cheeks, mixing with the dried blood from her self-inflicted scratches. I just wanted to get us ahead. The market was supposed to rebound. I was going to put the money back before anyone noticed. You have to believe me, Mitchell. I am not a bad person." Cameron finally managed to stand up, his legs shaking so violently he had to lean against the wall for support. He backed away from his wife as if she were a venomous snake preparing to strike. "You used me," he shouted, his voice echoing with profound betrayal and disbelief. "You made me drug my own father. You made me risk an attempted murder charge just to cover up your massive corporate theft. If the cops had looked into that folder 10 minutes ago, we would both be in handcuffs in the back of a squad car right now." Heather ignored him completely, crawling across the hardwood floor toward my armchair. She grabbed the cuff of my trousers, her fingers digging desperately into the fabric. "Mitchell, please," she begged, her voice raw and grating. "Your lawyer knows about your trust fund. He knows you have millions hidden away. You can fix this. You can write a check right now and save me." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic desperation. "I will pay you back every single cent. I will do whatever you want. I will leave Cameron right now. I will sign whatever legal documents you put in front of me. I will walk away and you will never see me again. Just please, I am begging you, do not let them send me to federal prison." I looked down at the woman gripping my leg. She was offering to abandon her husband in a heartbeat, ready to trade her marriage and her entire life for a quick financial bailout. She had no loyalty, no morals, and absolutely no shame. I slowly reached down and pried her fingers off my clothing, tossing her hand aside as if it were coated in a toxic disease. "I am not writing you a check for a single dime, Heather," I said coldly. "My wealth was earned through decades of honest innovation and hard work. It will never be used to cover the debts of a corporate thief." Heather slumped back against the floor, letting out a hollow, defeated moan. She knew it was over. Without my money to cover her tracks, the forensic auditors would find the missing funds by Monday afternoon. The FBI would be knocking on her office door before sunset. She wrapped her arms tightly around herself, trembling violently as the reality of her impending incarceration fully took hold. I watched her suffer for a long, agonizing moment before I stood up. I walked over to the mantel, calmly adjusting a picture frame that she had nearly knocked into a trash bag earlier. "However," I said, keeping my back to them, my voice smooth and conversational, "I am not going to call the FBI, and I am not going to kick you out of this house tonight." Heather stopped crying instantly. She slowly lifted her head, her ruined makeup smudged across her face, a tiny spark of confused hope lighting up her eyes. Cameron stared at my back, completely bewildered. "What are you saying, Dad?" he asked cautiously, clearly waiting for the other shoe to drop. I turned around, offering them a slow, predatory smile that made the blood run cold in their veins. "I am saying that I know exactly how desperate you are," I replied. "I know you need cash immediately to avoid a prison cell. So I am going to give you one final chance to save yourselves. I will let you sell this very house tomorrow morning to a cash buyer so you can pay back your company." Heather stared at me as if I had suddenly sprouted a second head. She wiped a streak of ruined mascara from her cheek, her mind visibly racing to process the massive lifeline I had just dangled in front of her. She did not question my motives or look for the hidden trap. A truly desperate criminal never looks a gift horse in the mouth. She only saw an immediate escape route from a devastating federal prison sentence. "You are completely serious," she whispered, her voice cracking with a cautious, overwhelming greed. "You will not call your lawyers to block the sale. You will just let us sell the property and keep the cash." I gave her a slow, deliberate nod. "The house is entirely yours to dispose of," I replied, my tone perfectly even and devoid of any emotion. "You already forged the transfer deed. The county registry officially lists you as the sole legal owner of this property. If you can find a buyer willing to close a cash deal by tomorrow morning, you can take the money, replace the embezzled corporate funds before your Monday audit, and walk away completely clean." Cameron looked at me, a profound confusion twisting his features. "Dad, why are you doing this?" he asked, stepping slightly away from the wall, still clutching his chest. "After everything we just did to you, after the fake paramedics and the forged signatures, why would you let us take your house?" I turned my cold gaze toward my treacherous son. "Because I want to sleep peacefully in my own bed tonight without worrying about you two trying to slip heavy psychiatric sedatives into my tea again," I said flatly. "Now you have exactly 12 hours to liquidate this property. I highly suggest you start making phone calls." I turned around and walked down the hallway toward my master bedroom, closing the heavy oak door firmly behind me. The moment the brass latch clicked into place, I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and sent a single encrypted text message to Robert Gallagher. "The bait is set. Initiate the expedited buyer protocol." I stood quietly by my bedroom door, pressing my ear against the wood paneling, listening intently to the frantic activity unfolding in the living room. Heather did not waste a single second apologizing to her husband or reflecting on the catastrophic failure of their kidnapping plot. She instantly reverted to her ruthless corporate survival mode. I heard the rapid, aggressive tapping of her acrylic nails against her smartphone screen as she frantically searched the internet for expedited real estate investors in the Atlanta area. "We need a distressed property buyer immediately," she barked at Cameron, completely ignoring his lingering anxiety and physical weakness. "Someone who does not require a formal inspection, an appraisal, or a 30-day escrow period. We need hard cash wired by tomorrow morning or my life is over." Within minutes, she was dialing a toll-free number. I listened to her end of the desperate negotiation. "Yes, I am calling about a premium property in the northern suburbs," she said, her voice dripping with artificial professional charm. "It is a prime piece of real estate, fully updated, zero structural issues. I need to liquidate it immediately due to a sudden and severe family medical emergency. I am willing to take a massive loss on the market value in exchange for a guaranteed 24-hour cash closing." There was a brief tense pause as the broker on the other end spoke. Heather paced the hardwood floor, her designer heels clicking sharply against the wood. $450,000, she countered aggressively, her voice rising in pitch. "That is at least $150,000 under the actual market value. You are stealing this house from me at that price. If your firm can wire those funds directly into my personal checking account by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, I will sign the title over to you completely as is. No questions asked." She waited, her breathing shallow and rapid, her entire future hanging on the response of a stranger over the phone. Then a massive, shuddering sigh of relief escaped her lips. "Perfect," she said, a victorious, arrogant smirk highly evident in her tone. "Send your mobile closing agent to the property at exactly 8 in the morning. I have the deed and my identification ready to go." She ended the call and let out a loud, triumphant laugh that echoed through the entire house. "Did you hear that, Cameron?" she cheered, completely ignoring the sick reality that she was celebrating the absolute theft of his father's home. "They are sending a mobile closer tomorrow morning. We are going to get $450,000 in pure, untraceable cash. I am going to pay back the company ledger before those forensic auditors even open their laptops on Monday. We are completely saved." The next morning arrived with a crisp, deceivingly bright sunrise. I remained hidden in my master bedroom, quietly packing a small leather duffel bag with a few personal essentials and my most important documents. Through the front window, I watched a sleek black luxury sedan pull into my driveway precisely at 8 o'clock. A tall, impeccably dressed woman stepped out carrying a heavy leather briefcase. She walked up to the front porch and rang the doorbell. I cracked my bedroom door open just enough to observe the living room without being seen. Heather had practically sprinted to the door. She was dressed in a sharp-tailored business suit, desperately trying to project the image of a successful, composed executive, rather than a panicked embezzler facing federal indictment. "Come in, please," Heather said, gesturing the closing agent toward the large dining table. The agent introduced herself politely and immediately began pulling thick stacks of real estate transfer documents from her briefcase. Heather did not even bother to read the fine print. She was completely blinded by the promise of the massive wire transfer that would miraculously save her from prison. She grabbed the black pen provided by the agent and began signing her name furiously on every single dotted line. She initialed the heavy disclosures, signed the absolute waiver of inspection, and formally executed the final sale contract without a second thought. Beside her, Cameron stood in absolute silence, watching his wife sell his childhood home to a complete stranger. He looked utterly miserable, his shoulders slumped in defeat, but his cowardice prevented him from stopping her. He was just as complicit in this final devastating act of fraud. "Sign right here to officially transfer the deed over to our corporate holding company." The closing agent instructed, smoothly sliding the final, most crucial document across the polished wood table. Heather gripped the pen and signed her name with a dramatic, arrogant flourish. She pushed the paper back across the table, her chest heaving with pure adrenaline. "It is completely done," she declared, leaning back in her chair with a massive, arrogant smile plastered across her face. "Now about the funds. My personal bank routing information is verified on the first page." The agent smiled politely, pulling a sleek digital tablet from her briefcase. "The wire transfer of $450,000 was authorized the exact moment you signed the deed, ma'am. It is processing directly into your personal checking account as we speak. Here is your official receipt and your final confirmation of the sale." The agent handed Heather a thick, glossy folder containing the transaction receipts and swiftly stepped out the front door, leaving the house in a state of quiet, heavy anticipation. I finally stepped out of my bedroom, walking slowly into the living room, holding my small leather duffel bag. Heather saw me and let out a cruel, mocking laugh. "You are an absolute fool, Mitchell," she sneered, waving the glossy folder aggressively in my direction. "You actually let me do it. You gave up your only home just to avoid a legal confrontation. Cameron and I are taking a first-class flight to the Caribbean tonight to celebrate, and you are officially homeless. Enjoy the streets, old man." She opened the glossy folder to gloat over her official wire transfer receipt, ready to bask in her magnificent victory. I watched the arrogant smile completely freeze on her face. Her eyes widened to the point of tearing, frantically scanning the top of the receipt where the purchasing company's name was printed in bold black ink. "What is this?" she whispered, the color draining from her face as her hands began to shake violently. "The buyer is listed as the Josephine Trust Limited Liability Corporation." I offered her a slow, freezing smile that made Cameron physically step backward in fear. Did you really think a random cash buyer negotiates a $500,000 blind deal at midnight? Heather, I asked softly. I did not let you sell my house to a stranger. I just let you sell my house directly back to my own corporate holding company. Heather stared at the receipt, her eyes darting between the name of my late wife and the official bank stamp. For a fraction of a second, absolute panic threatened to shatter her corporate facade, but her greed was a much stronger force than her logic. She crushed the glossy paper in her fist and let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. It does not matter who bought the house, Mitchell. She spat, her voice trembling slightly but regaining its venomous edge. The funds cleared. I saw the pending deposit on my app. You just gave me $500,000 of your own corporate money. I am going to clear my audit, and Cameron and I are leaving the country tonight. You played yourself, old man. She grabbed Cameron by the arm, her fingernails digging into his jacket. Move, she barked at her husband. We are going to the airport right now. I have my laptop. I can wire the company funds from the terminal lounge to cover the audit, and we will disappear before they even realize what happened. Grab the suitcases. Cameron looked at me one last time. There was no apology in his eyes, only the desperate, pathetic urgency of a coward running from the consequences of his actions. He grabbed the 2 heavy suitcases they had packed the night before and followed his wife out the front door. They climbed into Heather's luxury sedan, the tires squealing against the asphalt as she threw the car into reverse and sped out of the neighborhood. I stood on the porch watching the silver car disappear down the street. I did not chase them. I did not call the local police. I simply walked back inside, poured myself a fresh cup of chamomile tea, and sat in my armchair. Robert Gallagher had already initiated the next phase of our protocol. By the time they reached the international terminal, the trap would snap shut so violently it would break them. The drive to the airport was a frantic blur of adrenaline and arrogance. Heather weaved dangerously through the morning traffic, her mind completely consumed by the massive influx of cash she believed she had secured. She pulled into the long-term parking structure, grabbing her expensive rolling luggage while barking orders at Cameron. They navigated the crowded departure hall, heading straight for the premium international check-in counter. Heather approached the desk with the haughty, entitled posture of a woman who believed she had just outsmarted everyone. 2 first-class tickets on the next available flight to the Cayman Islands, she instructed the ticketing agent, sliding her passports and her heavy black corporate credit card across the polished counter. We have a sudden corporate retreat. Make sure the seats are together and arrange for priority boarding. The ticketing agent offered a polite practice smile and swiped the thick black card through the terminal system. Heather leaned against the counter, tapping her fingers rhythmically against the marble surface, already imagining the tropical breeze and her perfectly balanced accounting ledgers. She pulled out her smartphone to initiate the transfer to her company, entirely confident that the $450,000 was sitting safely in her checking account. Ma'am, the ticketing agent said, her professional smile faltering slightly as she stared at her monitor. I am getting an error code on this card. It says the transaction is declined. Heather let out an exasperated sigh, rolling her eyes at Cameron. Try it again, she snapped, waving her hand dismissively. It is a premium account with no spending limit. Your machine must be malfunctioning. I use that card for massive corporate expenditures every single day. The agent swiped the card a second time, then manually typed the account numbers into the system. The glowing red error message flashed across her screen once more. I am sorry, ma'am, the agent replied, her tone growing a bit more guarded and rigid. The system is completely rejecting the authorization. It is prompting a specific security code. That means the issuing bank has placed a hard freeze on the account. You will need to contact your financial institution before I can process these tickets. Heather snatched the card back, her face flushing with sudden intense heat. That is impossible, she hissed, her voice rising to draw the attention of the passengers waiting in line behind them. I literally just closed a $500,000 real estate transaction less than an hour ago. My account is completely flush with cash. Run it again or call a supervisor right now. Cameron stood nervously beside her, shifting his weight from foot to foot as people began to stare. Heather, what is going on? He asked, panic creeping back into his voice. Did my dad actually stop the money? Heather ignored him entirely, her thumbs flying across her smartphone screen as she opened her mobile banking application. She expected to see a massive positive balance reflecting the morning wire transfer. Instead, the screen displayed a glaring red banner across the top. Account suspended. Please contact the fraud department immediately. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead. She dialed the customer service number on the back of her card, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Answer the damn phone," she muttered under her breath, pacing away from the ticketing counter and leaving Cameron standing alone with the luggage. A representative finally answered. "This is Heather," she demanded, her corporate authority completely stripped away by rising fear. "You have frozen my accounts. I just received a wire for $450,000 from a legitimate real estate closing. Release the hold immediately. I am trying to purchase airline tickets." There was a heavy, suffocating silence on the line, accompanied by the rapid clicking of a keyboard. "Ma'am," the representative said, his voice completely devoid of any customer service warmth. "Your accounts have not been suspended for a standard security check. A hard lock was placed on your entire financial portfolio 45 minutes ago. The wire transfer you received was flagged by the originating institution as a highly fraudulent transaction." Heather felt the ground sway beneath her expensive designer shoes. "Fraudulent," she shrieked, drawing more stares from the crowded terminal. "I signed a legal deed. The title company authorized the wire in front of me. That money is mine. Release it right now." The representative remained entirely unfazed by her screaming. The originating entity, the Josephine Trust Limited Liability Corporation, filed a federal alert claiming the property transfer was executed using forged signatures and stolen assets. Because the funds crossed state lines and involved a corporate entity, the transfer has been seized under suspicion of massive money laundering and wire fraud. Every single dollar you possess, including your corporate access accounts, is now frozen pending a severe federal investigation. There is absolutely nothing I can do for you. The phone slipped from Heather's grip, clattering loudly against the hard terminal floor. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking hollow and utterly destroyed. The safety net she had sacrificed her marriage, her morals, and her freedom to secure had just evaporated into thin air. She had not sold my house. She had just provided the federal government with a perfectly documented, digitally tracked record of her own massive financial crimes. Cameron rushed over to her, grabbing her arm. "Heather, what did they say?" he demanded, shaking her slightly as the panic overtook him. "Did we get the money? Can we buy the tickets? We have to get out of here." She looked at him with empty, horrified eyes. "We have nothing," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the loud terminal announcements. "Mitchell did not give us the money to escape. He used the wire transfer to trigger a federal money laundering trap. My accounts are gone. The company money is gone. We are completely trapped." Before Cameron could even process the magnitude of her devastating words, a stern, authoritative voice cut through the noise of the busy departure hall. "Heather and Cameron, step away from the counter and keep your hands exactly where we can see them. Do not reach for your pockets." They turned around slowly, the remaining blood leaving their faces. 4 armed airport security officers, accompanied by 2 men wearing dark suits and holding official badges, had formed a tight, inescapable perimeter around them. The travelers in the terminal quickly backed away, giving the authorities a wide berth. The lead agent stepped forward, his expression completely ruthless and focused. "You are both being detained under direct orders from the Federal Bureau of Investigation," he stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality across the polished floor. "You are currently considered primary flight risks in an ongoing federal investigation for corporate embezzlement, massive wire fraud, and the attempted financial exploitation of a senior citizen. Put your hands behind your backs immediately." The sterile, windowless interrogation room was a brutal, jarring contrast to the luxurious tropical getaway Heather had envisioned just 2 hours ago. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with a low, relentless hum, casting sickly pale shadows across the scuffed metal table bolted directly to the cold concrete floor. She sat perfectly rigid in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her expensive tailored business suit now feeling like a ridiculous out-of-place costume. The heavy steel door clicked open with a loud metallic clank, and the lead FBI agent from the airport terminal walked in. He was carrying a thick, incredibly dense manila folder. He did not introduce himself again. He did not offer her a glass of water, ask if she was comfortable, or pretend to be friendly in any capacity. He simply tossed the massive file onto the center of the metal table. The resulting slap echoed like a gunshot in the cramped, airless room. Heather flinched violently, her manicured nails digging deeply into her own palms. She was completely isolated. The authorities had separated her from Cameron the exact second they were loaded into the armored transport vehicles outside the departure hall. She had absolutely no idea what her husband was saying to the investigators in whatever concrete box they had thrown him into down the hall. The agent pulled out an iron chair and sat down slowly, fixing her with a cold, unblinking stare that stripped away her remaining corporate bravado. He flipped open the folder, revealing high-resolution photographs, detailed financial printouts, and digital transcripts of her encrypted messages. He did not ask her for a confession. He simply began reading her devastating reality back to her. "We have the corporate ledgers, Heather," the agent stated, his voice completely devoid of any emotion or sympathy. "We have the offshore routing numbers. We have the digital footprint of your catastrophic cryptocurrency losses. You systematically embezzled over $500,000 from your employer. You are facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary for the corporate fraud alone. But that is not what is going to keep you locked in a concrete cell until you are a very old woman." He flipped the page, displaying a clear, undeniable still frame taken directly from my living room security camera. It was the exact moment Cameron dropped the heavy psychiatric sedative into my tea. The agent leaned forward, resting his forearms heavily on the table. Attempted murder, aggravated assault on a senior citizen, kidnapping conspiracy with unlicensed medical personnel, forging a dead woman's signature on a county property deed. You crossed the line from white-collar financial crime to highly violent felony offenses. You are looking at a combined sentence that guarantees you will never wear anything but a prison-issued jumpsuit again. Heather stared at the photograph of Cameron holding the poisoned cup. Her corporate survival instinct, honed through years of ruthless cutthroat boardroom negotiations, violently hijacked her panicked mind. She knew the golden rule of a sinking ship. The heaviest cargo gets thrown overboard first. The terrified, shaking woman vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating survivor desperate to save her own skin. She let out a ragged, perfectly timed sob, covering her face with her trembling hands. I did not know she wept, her voice shaking with an Oscar-worthy performance of profound, innocent betrayal. "I swear to you, I had absolutely no idea he was going to drug his own father. Cameron told me it was just a natural herbal supplement to help Mitchell sleep. He is the one who bought the powder. He is the one who poured it. I just sat there." The agent raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying a single second of her theatrical act, but remaining entirely silent to let her dig the hole deeper. Heather seized the silence, leaning across the metal table, her eyes wide and pleading. Cameron has always been obsessed with his father's money. He hated that Mitchell held all the wealth while we were struggling to maintain our lifestyle. I only forged the property deed because Cameron physically threatened me. He forced me to use my financial expertise to bypass the county systems. He told me if I did not help him steal the house, he would expose my corporate mistakes to my board of directors. He manipulated me. He masterminded this entire nightmare from the very beginning. I am just a victim of an abusive, greedy husband. Directly on the other side of the interrogation room wall, hidden behind a thick pane of one-way mirrored glass, Cameron sat in total suffocating darkness. He was not alone. Another federal agent stood silently in the corner, his arms crossed over his chest, closely watching my son process the absolute destruction of his marriage. Resting on the small metal table in front of Cameron was a high-grade tactical police speaker. The agents had deliberately rigged the audio feed from Heather's interrogation room to pipe directly into his space in real time. They did not need to aggressively interrogate Cameron to break him. They just needed to sit back and let his own wife do the heavy lifting for them. Cameron stared blindly at the speaker, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. He listened in mute horror to the crisp, clear transmission of Heather's voice as she methodically and ruthlessly dismantled his entire life. He heard her cry fake, manipulative tears. He heard her label him a violent, calculating mastermind who controlled her every move. He heard the woman he loved, the woman he had foolishly risked an attempted murder charge for, hand him over to the federal government on a silver platter just to shave a few years off her own inevitable prison sentence. The heavy psychiatric sedative he had accidentally consumed earlier that morning was now completely purged from his system, burned away entirely by the sheer, unadulterated adrenaline of massive betrayal. His hands curled into tight, shaking fists on the table. He remembered the exact moment Heather handed him that foil packet of powder in their kitchen. He remembered her screaming at him to make sure I drank every single drop. He remembered her laughing maliciously as she threw my late wife's precious belongings into a trash bag. She had orchestrated every single detail of the property theft. She had hired the fake paramedics. She had forged my signature because he simply did not have the technical skills or the corporate access to pull it off. He had followed her orders like a blind, pathetic dog, believing they were an unbreakable team fighting for a shared future. And now, listening to her sob to the FBI agent about how terrified she was of him, the illusion shattered completely into jagged pieces. She never loved him. He was just a convenient, disposable tool for her corporate ambitions. And the second that tool became a liability, she tossed it directly into the fire to save herself. A dark, primal rage ignited deep within Cameron's chest, entirely consuming the cowardly, anxious man he had always been. The fear of federal prison temporarily vanished, replaced by a singular burning desire for total retaliation. He did not care about the lost money anymore. He did not care about the house, the fake paramedics, or the frozen bank accounts. He only cared about destroying the treacherous woman sitting on the other side of that mirror. Cameron lunged out of his plastic chair with a guttural, furious roar that startled the seasoned agent standing in the corner. He threw his entire body weight forward, slamming his fists violently against the thick, reinforced glass separating the two interrogation rooms. The heavy, booming thud echoed through both spaces, instantly silencing Heather's fake sobbing next door. "She is lying," Cameron screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice raw and tearing with absolute unhinged hatred. "She is a lying, manipulative thief. She bought the drugs. She hired the notary. She forged the deed." He turned wildly toward the federal agent in the room, his eyes burning with a desperate, vengeful fire. "I will give you absolutely everything. I know where she hid the hardware wallet for the stolen cryptocurrency. I know the exact passwords to her offshore shell accounts. I will testify to every single federal crime she committed. Give me the plea deal right now and I will personally bury her." The dull thud of Cameron striking the reinforced glass reverberated heavily through the observation deck. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the head of my wooden cane, watching the security monitors mounted on the precinct wall. Beside me, Robert Gallagher let out a low, satisfied chuckle. The federal agents had granted us unprecedented access to the observation room, a rare courtesy afforded to high-net-worth individuals who deliver slam-dunk federal cases wrapped in a neat, undeniable bow. We had walked into the bustling precinct 10 minutes earlier, bypassing the crowded public waiting area and stepping directly into the secure federal wing. The lead agent, a stern man named Harris, had greeted us with a firm handshake, expressing his immediate gratitude for the meticulous mountain of evidence Gallagher had provided. I watched the split-screen display with absolute freezing detachment. On the left monitor, my treacherous son was screaming his throat raw, bargaining away his marriage and offering up cryptocurrency passwords to save his own skin. On the right monitor, Heather was staring at the mirrored wall in her interrogation room, the color completely drained from her face as she heard her husband sell her out to the FBI through the rigged speaker. The grand, arrogant criminal conspiracy they had launched against a supposedly helpless senior citizen had imploded into a pathetic, desperate scramble for survival. I adjusted the lapels of my wool coat, feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of the moment settling over me. It was finally time to step into the harsh light and show my brilliant, calculating daughter-in-law the true architect of her absolute destruction. I nodded to Agent Harris, requesting permission to enter her holding room. Agent Harris opened the heavy steel door, allowing me to step inside the cramped, airless interrogation room. Gallagher flanked me, standing like a silent, immovable sentinel in his tailored charcoal suit. Heather snapped her head up. Her eyes were bloodshot and swollen, the dried blood from her self-inflicted scratches flaking against her pale, sweating skin. When she saw me standing there perfectly composed and looking down at her, the very last remnants of her corporate defiance crumbled into dust. She scrambled up from her plastic chair, the heavy metal cuffs around her wrists clinking sharply as she tried to reach out to me. "Mitchell," she cried out, her voice a ragged, breathless plea that echoed off the concrete walls. "You came. I knew you would come. You have to tell them this is all a massive misunderstanding." I stood silently, my expression as unyielding as granite. She leaned awkwardly over the metal table, tears streaming down her ruined face, pouring every ounce of her manipulative energy into a pathetic display of remorse. "Please, you have to help me," she begged, her chest heaving with theatrical, desperate sobs. "Cameron forced me to do all of it. He is a monster. You heard him screaming in the other room. He is trying to frame me for everything to save himself. But you know I am a good person. I am a successful finance director. I have a whole life and a career ahead of me. You have millions of dollars hidden away in your trust. You can hire the best defense attorneys in the country to get me out of here. You can pay off the company I worked for so they drop the embezzlement charges. I will divorce Cameron today. I will sign away all my marital assets. I will give you the keys to my cars, my accounts, everything. I will spend the rest of my life working just to pay you back. Just please do not let them lock me in a federal prison. I am begging you, Mitchell. I am on my hands and knees." She actually tried to slide out of her chair and drop to the dirty concrete floor, completely abandoning whatever shreds of dignity she had left. The federal agent grabbed her by the arms and hoisted her roughly back into her seat. I looked down at her with absolute freezing contempt. She was not crying because she felt genuine remorse for trying to drug me. She was not apologizing for forging my dead wife's signature or attempting to steal the roof over my head. She was only crying because the predator had finally been caught in a steel trap she could not buy or lie her way out of. I let her sob for a few more seconds, letting the silence stretch until it became thick and suffocating. Then I slowly pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "I am not here to bail you out, Heather," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterical weeping like a surgical blade. "I am here to ensure that you fully comprehend the sheer magnitude of the mistake you made." I gestured slightly to Gallagher. My attorney stepped forward and placed a pristine leather-bound corporate binder directly in the center of the metal table. He flipped it open, revealing a stack of highly encrypted financial documents bearing the official watermark of the United States Department of Justice. "You thought you were committing a simple property theft against a lonely, retired old man," I continued, tapping my index finger against the open binder. "You thought you could bypass the county registry, force a quick cash sale, and quietly replace your embezzled corporate funds before anyone noticed. But you failed to conduct basic corporate due diligence. The house you attempted to sell does not belong to me personally. It belongs to the Josephine Trust Limited Liability Corporation, a heavily fortified holding company that manages a $10 million technology patent portfolio." Heather stared at the documents, her breathing turning shallow and erratic as the complex legal terminology began to click in her panicked brain. "By executing a fraudulent sale of that specific property, you did not just steal from a private citizen," Gallagher interjected, his voice deep and lethal. "You actively engaged in corporate espionage and wire fraud against a major financial institution. The $450,000 that you thought you successfully transferred this morning triggered an automatic federal grand jury indictment. You wired stolen assets across state lines into a corporate holding account that we specifically monitored to trap you." I slid a specific piece of paper across the table so it rested directly under her terrified eyes. It was a formal complaint filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, cross-referenced with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. "This document proves that your actions constituted a deliberate, premeditated attack on corporate infrastructure," I explained coldly. "You handed the federal government a perfectly documented, digitally tracked confession. Your employer will not drop the charges because my legal team has already provided them with the irrefutable proof of your cryptocurrency embezzlement. You have absolutely zero leverage, zero funds, and zero escape routes. You built this prison with your own two hands." The absolute finality of my words crushed the very last breath out of Heather's lungs. She slumped back in her plastic chair, her eyes wide and glassy, staring into the dark, inescapable abyss of a guaranteed 20-year federal sentence. Her jaw trembled, but no sound came out. She was entirely broken, stripped of her sophisticated corporate armor, and left with nothing but the devastating consequences of her boundless greed. I stood up, buttoning my coat with slow, deliberate precision. I looked down at the woman who had tried to erase my existence for a quick payout. "You chose to view my kindness as a weakness," I said softly, ensuring my voice carried the heavy weight of absolute judgment. "You chose to drag my son into a criminal conspiracy, and he chose to follow you blindly instead of protecting his own father. Now the two of you can turn on each other like starved animals in a cage." I turned my back on her and walked toward the heavy steel door. Gallagher followed closely behind, snapping the corporate binder shut. As the federal agent pulled the door open for us, Heather finally found her voice, letting out a raw, agonizing scream that echoed down the sterile precinct hallway. I did not pause. I did not look back. I stepped out of the interrogation room, leaving them exactly where they belonged to face their inevitable and entirely deserved fate. It took Heather exactly 36 hours to scrape together enough liquid capital to post her exorbitant federal bail. She liquidated her remaining legitimate stock options, pawned her diamond engagement ring, and surrendered the title of her luxury sedan to a shady, relentless bondsman just to secure her temporary release late on Sunday night. She did not waste a single second checking on Cameron, who remained rotting in his cold concrete holding cell, completely unable to post his own bail. Her survival instinct was entirely focused on one singular, desperate goal. She had to reach her corporate office before the sun came up on Monday morning. She needed to access the company servers, wipe the internal financial ledgers, and deploy a destructive malware virus to erase her digital footprint before the external auditors arrived. I knew every single detail of her frantic, miserable scramble because Robert Gallagher had paid the bail bondsman to track her every movement. We knew exactly what time she hailed a cheap cab. We knew exactly what time she approached the towering glass and steel corporate headquarters in the financial district. And we knew exactly what was waiting for her inside. Heather swiped her corporate badge at the employee entrance just past 6 in the morning, her hands trembling violently as the green light beeped in the quiet, completely empty lobby. She sprinted toward the elevators, bypassing the security desk entirely. Her expensive designer suit was heavily wrinkled and stained from her time in the precinct, her hair pulled back into a messy, frantic bun. It was a stark, pathetic contrast to the impeccable, arrogant executive she usually portrayed to the world. She reached the executive floor, sprinting down the carpeted hallway and bursting into her private corner office. She threw herself into her ergonomic leather chair and aggressively shook her computer mouse to wake the dual monitors. She typed her administrative password with lightning speed, her eyes wide with desperate, suffocating anticipation. A sharp red error message instantly flashed across both screens. Access denied. Administrative privileges revoked. She slammed her fists against the keyboard, letting out a sharp, panicked curse that echoed off her office walls. She tried her secondary credentials, then her emergency bypass codes, her fingers slipping over the keys in her haste. Every single attempt was met with the exact same glaring red rejection. Before she could even process the magnitude of her digital lockout, the heavy glass door of her office clicked open. 2 towering, broad-shouldered corporate security guards stepped into the room, their expressions completely neutral and unyielding. The chief executive requested your immediate presence in the main boardroom. The lead guard stated, his voice echoing loudly in the sudden, tense silence. Heather swallowed hard, a cold, heavy knot forming deep in her stomach. She smoothed her wrinkled jacket, forced her chin up, and marched out of her office, flanked tightly by the heavy guards. She genuinely believed she could still talk her way out of it. She thought she could spin a masterful corporate lie about a compromised server or a complex banking error. She pushed open the heavy double doors of the executive boardroom, ready to deliver the performance of her life. Her words died instantly in her throat. The massive mahogany table was not empty. At the head of the table sat the ruthless, highly respected head of the firm. Flanking him were 3 severe-looking men in dark suits, the elite forensic accountants brought in specifically for the audit. And sitting directly across from the chief executive, calmly sipping a cup of dark roast coffee, were Robert Gallagher and myself. Heather stopped dead in her tracks, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the heavy glass door as if she needed it to keep from collapsing onto the floor. Mitchell. She breathed, her voice barely a raw whisper, her eyes darting frantically between me and her furious employer. What are you doing here? I set my coffee cup down on its ceramic saucer with a soft, deliberate clink. I am just observing the natural consequences of your boundless ambition, Heather, I replied smoothly. Your employer graciously invited me to attend this morning's preliminary audit review, considering my holding company is officially listed as the primary victim of your recent wire fraud attempts. The chief executive stood up, tossing a thick, heavily tabbed binder onto the center of the mahogany table. It was the exact same dossier Gallagher had presented to her in the police interrogation room, only this one was expanded with devastating internal company metadata. You have absolutely, completely destroyed yourself, Heather, the executive said, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. Mr. Gallagher and his team provided us with your offshore routing numbers yesterday afternoon. Our information technology department isolated your terminal and verified every single transaction. You bypassed our dual authentication protocols. You funneled over $500,000 of our operating capital into a volatile cryptocurrency exchange, and you lost every single penny of it in a market crash. Heather opened her mouth, her corporate survival instincts kicking in one last pathetic time. Sir, please, you have to listen to me, she stammered, stepping forward with her hands raised defensively. My system was hacked. Someone compromised my administrative tokens over the weekend. I came in early today specifically to secure the network and report the breach to the technology department. We can track the protocol addresses. The executive let out a harsh, barking laugh of pure disbelief. Do not insult my intelligence, he snapped, pointing a sharp finger directly at her face. We have the internal security camera footage of you initiating the transfers from your own desk after hours. We have the digital logs of you covering the financial discrepancies with falsified expense reports. And we have the federal indictment filed against you for attempting to launder our stolen funds through a fraudulent real estate transaction involving Mr. Mitchell's corporate entity. You are not a victim of a sophisticated cyber attack. You are a common corporate thief, and you are officially terminated effective immediately. The final shred of Heather's carefully constructed world shattered into millions of jagged, irreparable pieces. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a frantic, begging desperation, hoping for a sliver of the mercy she had never shown anyone else. I simply looked back at her with a cold, unyielding stare, offering absolutely no salvation. She had tried to drug me, steal my home, and lock me in a psychiatric ward. There was no room left for forgiveness. The chief executive nodded sharply to the 2 security guards standing at the boardroom door. "Strip her badge, confiscate her company phone, and escort her out of the building," he ordered. "Do not let her touch a single piece of equipment on the way out." The guards stepped forward, flanking her tightly. One of them pulled the corporate lanyard from her neck, severing her final tie to the life she had sacrificed everything to build. She did not fight them. She was completely hollowed out, marching silently down the hallway as dozens of her former colleagues stepped out of their cubicles to watch her spectacular, humiliating downfall. The whispers and judgmental stares of the people she once commanded echoed through the open floor plan. They escorted her into the massive lobby, pushing her through the revolving glass doors and out onto the cold, unforgiving concrete of the financial district. I stood by the towering boardroom window alongside Gallagher, looking down at the busy street below. Heather was standing alone on the pavement, clutching a small cardboard box of her personal desk items, completely abandoned by her husband, stripped of her wealth and facing decades in a federal penitentiary. I watched her pull her personal cell phone from her pocket with trembling hands. She was staring at the blank screen, realizing she had absolutely no one left to rely on. Her money was gone, her reputation was destroyed, and her freedom was ticking away by the second. She slowly brought the phone to her ear, dialing a number in a state of absolute pathetic desperation, praying for a miracle that would never come. My smartphone vibrated deep inside my wool coat pocket. I remained perfectly still by the towering boardroom window, looking down at the tiny, defeated figure of my daughter-in-law standing on the cold concrete pavement of the financial district. I pulled the device out and glanced at the bright screen. The caller ID displayed Heather's name. She was standing exactly 50 stories below me, shivering in the brisk morning air, clutching her cell phone to her ear like a final lifeline. She had absolutely nowhere else to turn. Her corporate accounts were locked tight. Her personal savings were seized by federal investigators. Her husband was sitting in a county jail, holding cell, actively collaborating with the authorities to ensure she took the heaviest possible prison sentence. I swiped the green icon to accept the call and brought the phone to my ear, remaining completely silent. The line crackled with the harsh sounds of the busy city streets. I could hear the roar of passing delivery trucks, the sharp honk of a taxi cab, and the rapid, ragged sound of Heather breathing. "Mitchell," she gasped, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the syllables. "Please do not hang up the phone. You have to listen to me." I watched her through the thick, soundproof glass of the executive building. She was looking wildly up and down the crowded sidewalk, completely invisible to the thousands of corporate workers rushing past her. She was entirely stripped of her power, standing on the pavement with a single cardboard box containing a few cheap desk ornaments. I did not say a single word, forcing her to endure the heavy, suffocating weight of my deliberate silence. "I know you are furious," she sobbed, the tears flowing freely now, stripping away the last remaining layers of her arrogant corporate facade. "I know what Cameron and I did was utterly unforgivable, but I have absolutely nothing left. They froze my bank accounts. They took my company badge. I cannot even afford to buy a cup of warm coffee or hail a cab to a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I am standing on the street in the freezing cold with nothing but the clothes on my back. I am begging you, Mitchell. I am getting down on my hands and knees on this dirty sidewalk. You have the power to stop this nightmare. You are a multi-million-dollar investor with unmatched leverage. You know the chief executive of this company personally. You can tell them the real estate wire transfer was a massive misunderstanding between family members. You can tell the federal investigators that you actually authorized the paperwork and that I was acting on your behalf." Her desperation morphed into a pathetic, groveling negotiation. She was rapidly throwing away every single boundary, ethical standard, and shred of dignity she possessed. "I will do whatever you want," she pleaded, her words tumbling out in a frantic, overlapping rush. "I will sign a full, legally binding confession taking the blame for everything Cameron did. I will officially divorce him today so he never bothers you again. I will sign away my rights to any marital assets we have left. I will even surrender my own parents' retirement accounts to your trust if you just give me a chance. Just please withdraw the federal fraud complaint. I will work for you, Mitchell. I genuinely mean it. I will be your personal assistant, your housekeeper, your absolute servant. I will cook your meals from scratch, scrub your floors, clean your massive house, manage your daily schedule, and run every single one of your errands. You will never have to lift a finger for the rest of your natural life. I will spend the next 20 years of my existence working for you for absolutely free just to pay back the debt I owe you. I will be the loyal, obedient daughter you never had. Just please, I cannot survive in a federal penitentiary. Do not let them lock me in a cage." I watched her wipe her nose with the sleeve of her expensive, ruined blazer. She was offering to become an indentured servant to the very man she had tried to lock inside a psychiatric ward just 24 hours prior. She truly thought my wealth and my age meant I craved absolute control over another human being. She assumed I was just as corrupt and transactional as she was willing to trade a federal crime for a lifetime of free domestic labor. I listened to her string together empty promises, crying hysterically about her ruined reputation and her terrified state of mind. She never once apologized for the sheer cruelty of her actions. She only apologized because she had been caught by a superior force. I turned away from the towering window and walked slowly back toward the massive mahogany boardroom table. The chief executive and the forensic accountants had already exited the room to prepare their formal legal filings against her. Robert Gallagher remained seated in the corner reviewing a digital contract on his tablet, completely unbothered by the dramatic downfall occurring just outside the building. I sat down in a plush leather executive chair. In the center of the table rested a delicate porcelain teapot and a matching ceramic cup freshly brewed by the executive hospitality staff. A soft curl of steam rose from the spout carrying the soothing, earthy aroma of premium chamomile. I poured myself a fresh cup, the hot liquid splashing gently against the porcelain sides. I picked up the cup by its delicate handle and brought it to my lips. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the rich, warm tea soothe my throat. The flavor was sharp and pure, completely untainted by heavy commercial sedatives or malicious intentions. Through the phone speaker, Heather continued to wail, her voice growing increasingly hoarse and ragged. "Mitchell, please say something," she begged, her panic skyrocketing as my silence stretched into a second minute. "Tell me you will call your lawyers. Tell me you will fix this. I am freezing. People are staring at me. I have nowhere to go. I am totally at your mercy." I took another slow sip, contrasting the warmth of the ceramic cup in my hands with the freezing concrete Heather was standing on. I placed the ceramic cup back onto its matching saucer. The soft clink of the porcelain echoed clearly through the phone microphone. Heather stopped crying instantly. She heard the sound of the teacup and sucked in a sharp, terrified breath. "Mitchell," she whispered, her voice barely a hollow rasp. "Are you there? Will you help me?" I leaned back in the heavy leather chair, my expression completely cold and entirely unyielding. "Heather, I want you to remember something very clearly," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly measured. "I want you to think back to yesterday afternoon. Do you remember the cup of tea your husband handed to me while you waited for the fake notary to arrive? Do you remember the bitter, toxic substance you instructed him to dissolve into my drink to destroy my mind?" She gasped, a harsh, choking sound of pure terror. "Mitchell, please, no." I did not let her finish. "That tea had the distinct, unforgettable taste of absolute betrayal," I stated, cutting through her pleas like a razor. "I am enjoying a much better cup of tea right now. You are not going to be my servant, Heather. You are going to be a federal inmate for the next 20 years. I pulled the phone away from my ear, ignoring her sudden, blood-curdling scream for mercy. I tapped the red icon to end the call, immediately opened her contact profile, and permanently blocked her number. I set the phone face down on the polished table, picked up my warm cup, and took another peaceful sip. 3 days after I blocked Heather's desperate phone call and left her freezing on the concrete pavement of the financial district, a thick, heavily stamped envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address bore the unmistakable seal of the county correctional facility. Inside were exactly 10 pages of crammed, frantic, and tear-stained handwriting. It was a desperate manifesto from Cameron, my treacherous son, writing from a cramped concrete holding cell. He dedicated the first 3 pages entirely to throwing his wife under the bus, claiming Heather had manipulated his mind emotionally, abused him, and forced him to participate in the plot to drug me and steal my home. He spent the next 4 pages attempting to weaponize my profound love for his late mother, begging me to remember the innocent little boy I had raised. He wrote about our fishing trips, his middle school graduation, and the promises I made to Josephine to always protect him. The final 3 pages were a pathetic, groveling plea for salvation. He begged me to talk to the district attorney to withdraw the attempted murder charges and to save him from a brutal 20-year sentence. I read every single word sitting in my quiet, secure living room. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel a sliver of sympathy. I simply picked up the phone and called Robert Gallagher, instructing him to arrange a formal legal visitation at the county jail for the following morning. The maximum security visitation room was a sterile, unforgiving environment consisting of cinderblock walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and thick panes of bulletproof glass. I sat on a hard metal stool, placing my wooden cane flat across my lap. Robert Gallagher stood directly behind me, his heavy leather briefcase resting on the small metal counter. A heavy steel door clanked open on the opposite side of the glass. A bored corrections officer escorted Cameron into the visitor booth. My son looked absolutely abhorrent. He was wearing an oversized, bright orange prison jumpsuit that swallowed his shrinking frame. His hair was greasy and unkempt, and dark, exhausted bags hung heavily under his bloodshot eyes. He slumped into the metal chair and snatched the telephone receiver from the wall with shaking hands. "Dad," he gasped, pressing his face against the thick glass, his voice cracking through the receiver speaker. "You came. I knew you would not abandon me. I am so incredibly sorry. You have to believe me, it was all Heather. She completely ruined my life." I picked up the receiver on my side of the glass, maintaining a perfectly rigid posture. "I am not here to listen to your excuses, Cameron," I said, my voice echoing with a flat, terrifying calm that instantly silenced his frantic rambling. "You are a 35-year-old man. You made a conscious, deliberate choice to drop a heavy commercial sedative into my tea. You chose to watch me drink it, hoping it would destroy my mind so you could steal my house." Cameron began to sob, heavy, ragged tears streaming down his face. "I was weak," he cried. "I was so scared of her. I will do anything, Dad. Just please do not let them send me to the state penitentiary. I will not survive in here." I gestured to Gallagher. My attorney stepped forward, unlatched his briefcase, and pulled out a crisp, meticulously drafted legal document. He slid it through the narrow metal transaction slot at the bottom of the glass partition. The papers came to rest directly in front of Cameron. "You are currently facing an extended sentence for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, kidnapping, and attempted murder," I explained clinically. "However, the district attorney respects my wishes as the primary victim. I am willing to formally petition the court for extreme leniency. I will request that they drop the violent felony charges and allow you to plead out to a minor misdemeanor. You will avoid a 20-year prison sentence and walk away with simple probation. But in exchange, you will sign the document resting in front of you. It is a full, irrevocable, legally binding renunciation of your status as my next of kin. You are signing away your right to any current or future inheritance, completely surrendering any claim to my estate, my properties, and my financial assets upon my death." Cameron stared down at the thick stack of legal papers, his tear-filled eyes scanning the bold, uncompromising legal jargon. The document was explicitly clear. By signing, he would be permanently disinherited. He would have zero legal standing to challenge my will, contest my estate, or request a single penny from my accounts ever again. He would be entirely cut off from his family bloodline in the eyes of the law. He swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he hovered over the signature line. I watched the pathetic gears turning in his panicked mind. He was weighing the value of his freedom against the perceived value of my estate. To Cameron, I was just a retired old man living on a fixed pension. He believed my entire net worth consisted of the modest suburban house he had tried to help Heather sell and the $40,000 decoy savings account that was currently locked down by federal fraud investigators. In his short-sighted, greedy calculation, he was trading a relatively insignificant inheritance for a golden ticket out of a brutal, violent prison environment. It was an incredibly easy choice for a coward. "Give me a pen," Cameron demanded, his voice breathless with a sudden, desperate urgency. He turned toward the corrections officer standing in the corner of his booth. "Please, I need a pen right now." The guard unclipped a cheap plastic pen from his uniform shirt and tossed it onto the metal counter. Cameron snatched it up as if it were a life preserver in a stormy ocean. He did not bother to read the fine print. He did not consult a defense attorney to review the binding clauses. He simply pressed the pen to the paper and aggressively scribbled his signature across every single designated line. He flipped the pages furiously, initialing the waivers, signing away his rights, and legally erasing himself from my family tree. He shoved the completed document back through the narrow transaction slot. Gallagher smoothly retrieved the papers, quickly verifying the signatures before stamping it with his official notary seal. "It is completely executed and legally binding." Gallagher confirmed, sliding the document into his leather briefcase with a satisfying snap. Cameron let out a massive, shuddering sigh of relief, slumping back into his metal chair. "Thank you, Dad," he gasped, wiping his sweaty forehead. "I swear to you, I will make this right. I will get a job. I will rebuild my life. You will see. I do not care about the house or the savings account. I just want my freedom." I stood up slowly from the metal stool, leaning my weight comfortably onto my wooden cane. "I am very glad you do not care about the money, Cameron," I said, my voice echoing with a chilling, absolute finality, "because you just gave up significantly more than a suburban house and a frozen savings account." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a single, heavily embossed sheet of premium paper. It was the official certified valuation statement for the Josephine Trust Limited Liability Corporation. I folded it neatly in half and slid it through the transaction slot, letting it rest on the metal counter right in front of him. Cameron picked it up with shaking fingers. He unfolded the paper, his bloodshot eyes scanning the official bank seals and the bold black numbers printed at the bottom of the page. The document clearly displayed a fully diversified liquid corporate portfolio holding a verified net worth of exactly $12,400,000. All the color drained from Cameron's face, leaving him looking like a corpse. His jaw unhinged, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated horror as the true magnitude of his catastrophic mistake finally registered. He had just signed away a massive multi-million-dollar fortune to save himself from a trap he had willingly walked into. I hung up the receiver, turned my back on my screaming son, and walked out of the prison. The heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse swung open, and I stepped into the gallery with Robert Gallagher by my side. The courtroom was a sprawling theater of polished mahogany, high-vaulted ceilings, and an oppressive, suffocating silence. The air was thick with the distinct tension that only precedes a final, unalterable judgment. I took my seat in the front row, directly behind the prosecutor's table. I rested my hands on the curved handle of my wooden cane, my posture perfectly rigid, my expression completely unreadable. A few moments later, the side door opened, and the bailiffs escorted the defendants into the room. Heather walked in first. The aggressive, high-powered corporate executive was entirely gone. She wore a standard-issue, shapeless khaki prison uniform. Her hair hung limp and unwashed around her pale, gaunt face. Cameron trailed close behind her, his shoulders slumped, his eyes glued firmly to the scuffed linoleum floor. He wore the same drab uniform, looking every bit the broken, defeated coward he had always been. They did not look at each other. The toxic alliance that had fueled their criminal conspiracy had completely evaporated, replaced by a bitter mutual hatred. Heather took her seat beside her public defender, her hands trembling so violently that the heavy metal chains around her wrists rattled against the wooden table. The bailiff called the courtroom to order, and the presiding judge, a stern woman with decades of experience handling white-collar and elder abuse cases, took her seat at the high bench. The day of reckoning had officially arrived. The judge adjusted her glasses, looking down at the massive stack of case files, financial audits, and digital transcripts resting in front of her. She did not offer a single ounce of sympathy. She looked directly at Heather, her voice echoing through the quiet room with the sharp, devastating strike of a gavel. "Heather, you orchestrated a highly sophisticated, malicious campaign of corporate embezzlement and wire fraud," the judge stated, her tone laced with absolute disgust. "Furthermore, you attempted to cover your financial tracks by initiating a ruthless, premeditated attack on a vulnerable senior citizen. You forged legal documents, you hired unlicensed medical personnel for an illicit kidnapping, and you actively conspired to medically incapacitate your own father-in-law. These are not crimes of sudden desperation. These are the calculated actions of a deeply remorseless predator." The judge paused, letting the heavy weight of her words crush the remaining air out of Heather's lungs. "For the federal charges of corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and aggravated elder abuse, you are sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole." Heather collapsed back into her wooden chair, her mouth opening in a silent, agonizing scream as the reality of a decade behind bars completely destroyed her. The judge then turned her stern, unyielding gaze toward my son. "Cameron, you stood by and willingly participated in the attempted drugging and financial ruin of the man who raised you." The judge continued. "I have reviewed the petition for leniency filed by the primary victim, your father, requesting a reduced misdemeanor charge in exchange for your total cooperation. I acknowledge your testimony against your wife and your formal relinquishment of your inheritance. However, this court cannot entirely overlook your active role in administering a dangerous psychiatric sedative to an elderly man. The justice system requires absolute accountability. The judge leaned forward, clasping her hands together. I am accepting the plea deal to drop the violent felony charges, saving you from a 20-year sentence. But your actions warrant severe consequences. You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in a medium-security state correctional facility, followed by 5 years of heavily monitored probation. Cameron dropped his head into his hands, sobbing loudly. He had avoided the maximum sentence, but he would still lose half a decade of his life trapped in a concrete cell, all for absolutely nothing. He wept bitterly, the harsh truth settling over him. He traded his father, his home, and a $12 million empire for a jail cell and a felony record. The judge slammed her wooden gavel down the sharp crack, finalizing the destruction of their greedy ambitions. The court is adjourned, she declared, rising from her leather chair and disappearing into her private chambers. The legal proceedings were officially over. The trap I had carefully laid was completely sealed. As the heavy reality of a 12-year federal sentence crashed down upon her, Heather completely snapped. The remaining shreds of her sanity and public decency evaporated into the sterile courtroom air. She shoved her chair backward with such violent force that it tipped over and clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. She spun around, completely ignoring the armed bailiffs stepping toward her, and locked her bloodshot, furious eyes directly onto me. "You did this to me!" she shrieked, her voice tearing through the quiet courtroom like a jagged piece of rusted metal. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, the veins bulging visibly against her pale neck. "You planned every single second of this, you evil old monster. You had millions of dollars hidden away. You could have easily paid off my company. You could have saved my career. You ruined my entire life just to prove a point." The bailiffs rushed forward, grabbing her by the arms to restrain her, but she thrashed against their grip with the frantic, explosive energy of a cornered animal. The heavy chains around her wrists and ankles rattled fiercely as she fought them. "You set me up!" she screamed, spitting the words across the room as the officers began dragging her toward the heavy side doors. "You let me sell that house. You let me wire the money. You wanted me to go to prison. I hope you rot in your massive empty mansion, Mitchell. I hope you die entirely alone." I remained seated in the front row, perfectly still. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or offer a single word of defense. I just looked at her with an expression of absolute freezing indifference. I watched her kick and scream, blaming everyone else in the world for the consequences of her own boundless greed. She was a pathetic, broken thief who had finally run out of lies to tell. Cameron watched his wife being dragged away, but he did not say a word. He just stood there handcuffed and weeping before a second set of bailiffs escorted him out through the same heavy door. He did not look back at me. He knew there was absolutely nothing left to say. The echoing slam of the heavy steel doors shutting behind them was the final punctuation mark on 40 years of unappreciated sacrifice. They were gone. The courtroom slowly emptied, leaving only Robert Gallagher and myself in the quiet, sprawling gallery. My attorney closed his leather briefcase with a satisfying, decisive snap. "It is entirely finished," Mitchell Gallagher said softly, offering a rare, genuine nod of respect. "You protected your estate and you excised the poison from your life. The board is completely clear." I stood up from the wooden bench, leaning comfortably onto my cane. I felt lighter than I had in decades. The suffocating weight of my son's deceit and the endless paranoia of their betrayal had completely vanished. I walked out of the federal courthouse, stepping through the massive glass doors and into the bright, crisp afternoon sunlight. The air tasted incredibly fresh. Parked directly at the bottom of the wide concrete steps was a sleek, jet-black chauffeured town car, waiting quietly with the engine purring. The driver, dressed in a sharp black suit, quickly stepped around the vehicle and pulled the rear door open for me. I did not look back at the courthouse. I did not cast a single glance over my shoulder at the concrete cage holding my past. I stepped smoothly into the luxurious leather interior of the town car, ready to finally enjoy the massive empire I had built. The town car glided smoothly through the bustling streets of downtown Atlanta, leaving the imposing federal courthouse and the wreckage of my past far behind in the rearview mirror. The trial was heavily publicized. Local news outlets ran the sensational story of the ruthless corporate executive and the treacherous son who conspired to drug a senior citizen. In doing so, my name and my previously hidden net worth were broadcast across the entire county. The camouflage was completely gone, and within 48 hours, my quiet suburban street transformed into an absolute circus. Neighbors who had not spoken to me in a decade suddenly appeared on my front porch, holding freshly baked casseroles and forcing sympathetic, predatory smiles. "Mrs. Higgins, The same woman who had watched from her window as I was shoved into a fake ambulance suddenly remembered we were dear friends. She brought a homemade pie and a tragic, tearful story about her grandson desperately needing $50,000 for a struggling tech startup. The man across the street who used to complain relentlessly about the leaves from my oak tree falling on his driveway knocked on my door asking for a massive small business loan. They looked at me with the exact same ravenous, calculating hunger that Heather and Cameron had displayed. They did not see a man who had just survived a horrific family betrayal. They saw a walking, breathing bank account. I realized instantly that the quiet, modest life I had built in that suburban house was completely over. The predators were circling. I did not entertain a single one of their pathetic, transparent requests. I refused to open my front door, instructing Robert Gallagher to handle the immediate and aggressive sale of the property. The house was sold to a legitimate commercial developer within a week. I packed only the belongings that truly mattered, mostly photographs and mementos of my late wife Josephine, and left the suburbs behind forever. I purchased a sprawling, heavily fortified private estate in the exclusive Buckhead district. The property was completely hidden behind towering wrought iron gates and guarded by 24-hour private security. For the first time in years, I felt entirely safe within my own walls. But I did not buy the estate simply to hide from the world. I used my immense resources to build something that would outlast me. I directed Gallagher to establish the Josephine Trust Foundation for Elder Protection. I poured $2 million into the initial operating budget, hiring a ruthless, highly specialized team of seasoned attorneys, private investigators, and forensic accountants. Their sole corporate mission was to identify, relentlessly pursue, and legally destroy anyone attempting to financially exploit or physically abuse senior citizens. We provided free, aggressive legal representation to victims who had been isolated and silenced by their own greedy families. I took the very nightmare Cameron and Heather had inflicted upon me and forged it into a highly weaponized shield for others. 6 months after the sentencing, the foundation had already secured a dozen major convictions against abusive relatives and corrupt care facilities. The undeniable success of the organization attracted massive media attention. A prominent, award-winning investigative journalist requested an exclusive sit-down interview to discuss the foundation's rapid expansion. I agreed, inviting her and her camera crew into the expansive, sunlit library of my new estate. She sat across from me in a plush leather chair, her posture professional and her questions sharp. We discussed the staggering statistics of financial elder abuse in the country, the sophisticated tactics predators use to isolate their victims, and the legal loopholes my foundation was actively working to close. She was deeply impressed by the clinical, highly effective structure of the organization. But as the interview neared its conclusion, the atmosphere in the quiet library shifted. She closed her notepad, resting her hands on her lap, and looked at me with a soft, intensely probing expression. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice dropping to a serious, almost somber tone, "you have built an incredible legacy out of a profound personal tragedy. You are saving countless lives. But the public knows the origins of this foundation. They know the architects of your abuse were your own daughter-in-law and your only son." She paused, letting the heavy weight of the topic settle between us. "Your son is currently serving 5 years in a state penitentiary because of the undeniable evidence you provided to the federal authorities. Some critics might argue that family loyalty should transcend legal punishment, that a father should always protect his child no matter the cost." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto mine. "When you lay your head on your pillow at night, alone in this massive estate, do you ever feel a shred of guilt? Do you ever regret sending your own flesh and blood to a concrete cell?" The heavy, suffocating silence filled the sprawling library. The bright studio lights set up by the camera crew reflected sharply in the polished mahogany of my desk. The camera operator slowly zoomed in, capturing every single line on my face, waiting for a crack in my composure, waiting for the sorrowful confession of a broken, grieving father. I did not blink. I did not look away. I turned my head slightly, bypassing the journalist entirely, and looked directly, piercingly into the cold, black lens of the television camera. "I did not put my son in a cell," I stated, my voice completely steady, resonating with a chilling, undeniable, absolute truth. He locked himself in the exact moment he dropped that toxic powder into my tea. I kept my gaze locked on the camera lens, speaking not just to the journalist in the room, but to the millions of viewers who would watch the broadcast, and specifically to the 2 inmates I knew would eventually see this footage. A prison is not built with steel bars and concrete walls. A prison is constructed by the choices we make when we believe no one else is watching. Cameron and Heather chose to view my age as a weakness. They chose to view my 40 years of parental sacrifice as an opportunity for theft. They constructed an elaborate, highly illegal conspiracy to strip me of my dignity, my home, and my free will. I simply provided the authorities with the exact blueprints of the cage they had already built for themselves. The journalist watched me completely captivated by the raw, unapologetic strength in my response. True love, whether it is romantic or parental, does not require you to set yourself on fire simply to keep someone else warm. I continued, my voice echoing firmly through the library. Society conditions us to believe that blood ties demand unconditional surrender. We are told to forgive the unforgivable simply because the predator shares our last name. I refuse to subscribe to that toxic, self-destructive ideology. When my son watched me lift that poisoned mug to my lips, he completely severed the familial bond. He became an active threat to my existence. And I eliminated that threat with the exact same clinical precision he intended to use against me. I feel absolutely no guilt for surviving. I feel zero regret for demanding justice. Walking away from toxic, dangerous people is not a failure of love. It is the ultimate expression of self-respect. I shifted my gaze back to the journalist, offering a calm, composed smile. In fact, I am utilizing this exact public platform to ensure my intentions remain permanently and legally unassailable. I reached into the breast pocket of my tailored suit and pulled out a thick, legally binding, heavily notarized document. I placed it gently on the table between us. As of this morning, I have officially and irrevocably restructured the entirety of the Josephine Trust Limited Liability Corporation. Every single property, every stock option, the multi-million-dollar tech patent portfolio, and the remaining $12 million in liquid capital have been permanently transferred into an unbreakable blind charitable trust. The journalist's eyes widened as the sheer magnitude of my financial declaration registered. I have legally stripped myself of the ability to reassign these assets, I explained smoothly. Upon my eventual death, every single remaining cent will automatically deploy to fund the Elder Protection Foundation in perpetuity. I deliberately chose a legal framework that cannot be contested, challenged, or dismantled in probate court by any living relative. My bloodline is officially and entirely disinherited from my wealth forever. Far away from the comfort of my sunlit estate, deep inside the cold, sterile confines of a federal penitentiary recreation room. Heather would eventually see this exact broadcast playing on a small caged television monitor. She would sit in her scratchy khaki uniform, surrounded by the bleak reality of her 12-year sentence, and watch the multi-million-dollar fortune she had destroyed her entire life to steal evaporate into thin air. In a separate, equally dismal state facility, Cameron would hear my words echoing through a communal screen. He would stare at the walls of his cell, haunted by the crushing, inescapable knowledge that he traded his freedom, his father, and an empire of wealth for a pathetic, greedy lie that yielded absolutely nothing. They were left with nothing but the devastating weight of their own consequences. The camera crew packed up their equipment, and the journalist thanked me profusely before being escorted off the secure property. I walked out through the heavy French doors of my study and stepped onto the sprawling, sun-drenched back porch of my estate. The meticulously manicured gardens stretched out toward the horizon, peaceful and perfectly quiet. The heavy iron gates at the perimeter stood tall, keeping the greed and the malice of the world firmly at bay. I sat down in a plush outdoor armchair, leaning my cane gently against the side table. My private chef stepped out onto the patio, silently placing a delicate porcelain cup of freshly brewed premium chamomile tea on the table beside me. A soft curl of steam rose into the crisp afternoon air, carrying the rich, earthy aroma. I picked up the cup by its delicate handle and brought it to my lips. I took a slow, deep sip. There was no strange powder. There was no bitter, toxic aftertaste of betrayal. There was only the pure, untainted flavor of absolute peace. I rested the cup back on its saucer, breathing in the fresh air. I was 70 years old, completely alone, and I had never been more powerful, more secure, or more entirely free. Another vital lesson this story teaches is that true strength demands absolute patience. Heather and Cameron believed manipulation and entitlement granted them power over an aging man. However, their blinding greed made them incredibly careless. They mistook silence for ignorance and stillness for weakness. His calm victory proves you never need to lower yourself to a toxic level to defeat them. By maintaining unyielding boundaries and letting them expose their own malice, you build an impenetrable fortress. Protect your peace fiercely because greedy relatives only hold power if you surrender. Please share your own personal stories of similar betrayals below.